opposed to your mature video game taste, Doobie, with Minecraft.
Look, I played Minecraft so I could terrorize people. Okay, it was a whole thing. They built this thing out for like 3 weeks, and then I blew it up. It was one of the best things I've ever done in my life.
So, topic 1. The environmental movement has long struggled to keep corporations accountable for the damage that they do. At best, repeat offenders can be repeatedly sued in courts or made to pay fines imposed by the government. The former is unbelievably expensive and time-consuming. The latter is usually ineffective and imposes a small cost. So, instead, should we implement an environmental corporate death penalty for companies who refuse to comply with regulation? Okay, so this topic is a bit similar to one we had a few weeks ago on ecocide, but I literally thought of this one myself. It wasn't like from an article or anything. I think my thought process was, right, I was thinking about housing. I was thinking about trying to come up with a topic, right, because it's a real pain in the ass to do these things. And I was thinking about my take when it comes to housing. That we should like seize housing from corporations, right? And I'm like, what other pain can we cause them? And I'm like, corporate death penalty. And I thought, this is something Connor's gonna love.
You thought right. Yeah.
So yeah, but why don't we have a way of saying, okay, if we think climate change is something that is existential, why don't we have a mechanism to prove that we're actually serious about this? And if you don't comply, yes, we get rid of the corporation, not the people around it. All right. Introductions. We'll start with GSU Gambit.
Yeah, so I like this. I'm happy I got a topic that I can show people I have some left-leaning values, because usually it's all right-wing stuff. I think that if you're a person that has amassed some wealth in this country, you start to look at things very differently. One of those things for me was like speeding tickets. I didn't care at all. If I got a speeding ticket, whatever, okay, I'll just pay the fine. And then I got to the point where I was going to lose my license if I didn't stop the behavior. So I was going to lose something other than money, like access or something like that. And I think it's incredibly different when you're in a situation where you're going to be fined money versus where you're going to have some sort of access revoked. So I think something to stop large corporations dumping things in water. There's been tons and tons of incidents of people dying as a result of this. So having some sort of threshold that can be met in ending a company, I would absolutely support that. But I don't even know if I'm willing to have my mind changed on this. So I'll listen to everybody else, and maybe somebody have a compelling argument. But in our capitalist system, there are going to be people that make money, and those people don't care about fines. If you're in the chat, think about it this way: I can hand you $1 million and say, "Hey, you got to pay 100K of it in fines." You would take that $1 million every time. That's exactly what these companies are doing. I think it's disgusting, but yeah.
Great. I love that when you start off a debate saying how my mind cannot be changed, but wonderful. Let's go to Jack.
Yeah, I mean, it's not unheard of in the United States that we have some mechanism like this. In like the early 1900s, for example, different monopolies would be dissolved by the state if they were deemed to have like too much predatory behavior with their monopoly power. And I think that bringing that back for ecological reasons would be very, very reasonable. However, I would first say maybe instead of doing something like completely destroying the company and like the infrastructure of the company kind of just gets absorbed into other companies that might have to have the same thing happen to them. What if we just change them into democratic worker co-ops? I know that a lot of people are probably going to roll their eyes at that, but again, I think it's a lot harder to say, hey, democratic voters, let's democratically dump this toxic waste into the water supply, as opposed to, a board of directors who only cares about the profit. Because most people, aren't going to be down with poisoning like the local community that they live in, for example. So I would say, have that dissolution in place, but maybe step one on the way to dissolution, make it a democratic worker co-op. See how that goes.
Okay, all right. Let's go to counterpoints.
Nah, I'm good on this. So I think there's plenty of shit that you can do. I think you can criminally punish polluters. I think you can sue them. I think you can hold them accountable. Also, one of the things that Riverboat Jack just talked about, I think, is one of the most based things a Republican has ever done, which is trust busting. Basically, Franklin is the commie. Teddy is the environmentalist hunter who actually had a bunch of centrist or left-wing positions. And one of the things he was famous for was actually using governmental power to bust trusts. I think you can do that. The main problem that we have right now is that everybody in Washington, D.C. is currently purchased by, basically private interest. So they don't give a shit about holding private interest accountable. I think we need to find somebody with nutsack to actually reconstitute the spirit of Teddy Roosevelt and just start knocking heads together. So I'm interested in that. And maybe 20 years from now, if you guys make my Patreon lucrative enough, I'll be that person. So, I'll just start trust busting for shits and gigs.
It honestly...
Wait, you got a Patreon? Since when?
Not yet. Once we get to 10K.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
I plan to be your first member, hopefully.
It honestly bothers me that trust busting isn't a euphemism for something. Like it every time I hear it, I'm like, why not? It's like right there.
What do you think? What do you think it should be a euphemism for?
I feel like we can get creative here on the internet, or not creative and just use the usual things. But okay, moving on. Shadows.
It sounds pleasant.
I think so.
Yeah. So, I kind of agree with Connor's point. I'm definitely good on, killing corporations. I don't like. Obviously, it's metaphorical and it would involve trust busting, but I think when it comes to companies that do polluting with this stuff, I think generally these are companies and industries where trust busting them probably is not the best. So I think you did mention, of course, that we can sue rather than pay fines. And yes, that is unbelievably expensive and time consuming. But guess what? Good news. When you're the federal government, you can do things that are really expensive because you don't have to worry about being fiscally responsible. The same way states and local governments do.
I'm glad you can agree on that point. Let's clip that part and use that later.
Seems like a real good argument that could be used in other places.
Sorry, buddy. Sorry. Shadows, I apologize.
Yeah, well, I mean, I don't think I've generally... but yeah, that is generally true, and you can definitely feel free to use that against conservatives in the future for any of you in chat. But yeah, you don't have to worry about being fiscally responsible, and also... it can be time consuming. But you want to know what I want to say in response to that? Expand the DOJ, baby. What's wrong with that? Hire more people out of law school, to, be part of an expanded DOJ. If we have a part of the DOJ that is dealing with these problems in a more expensive manner, then do that because it's more expensive for the corporations. The thing is, you are completely right. Corporations can deal with, this is something that a lot of libertarians will mention, funnily enough, since I mentioned that earlier point, is that they will mention that regulations are harder on smaller businesses in an industry because bigger corporations, they can offset the costs. They can absorb a compliance cost much better. However, if we have something like this, corporations are not going to be as good as absorbing the cost of a fucking lawsuit. So yeah, I would say we should just keep suing them. And yeah, expand the DOJ. Can't go wrong with that.
Kobe.
Yeah, so I didn't really have anything like prepared here because I already have. I think there's already been a lot of interesting points made, so I'm just kind of
rapid fire off like a couple of my ideas here. We were talking a couple weeks ago on the open panel that happens after this, where people can come and share their thoughts about what gets talked about here. And we were talking about like capitalism versus socialism, and I came to a conclusion that was pretty interesting, which was multiple people on the panel brought up the idea that like if we had a socialist society, that we would not have these or have less of these problems with climate change. And I came to the conclusion that I actually don't think that it's up to either capitalism or socialism to deal with the problem of the climate. The capitalism or socialism are questions of how we distribute labor. Climate change is a question of social ecology. I'm describing social ecology as the study of how a society and as a whole relates to the ecosystem that society happens to exist within. We are the modern humans are dealing with something that no other humans have ever had to deal with, which is while humans have been all over the earth, humans have not shared a ecosystem. There was more of a direct like sort of like land to table kind of necessary because of the constrictions of most of human society. But we live in a globalist society now. We have to deal with a global ecology. Everybody affects everybody in a way that's not happened before, and that's where the big problem I think of climate change comes in, which is the dispersed guilt. A lot of the problems is not it's a one person's fault. We're having floods here in Germany. It's a one person's fault. Germany's doing actually a lot of things that's progressive. They're having a push. A lot of people that are trying to do a lot of good things climate change wise. But the problem is that it is true that everybody is a little bit guilty. We all contribute, and I think that perhaps focusing on something like, or proposing something like a corporate death, or like a death penalty for polluters, perhaps is kind of a similar way of like doing like the kind of carbon footprint, right? The only reason a corporation is going to want to pollute is because there's a market for people that want a thing that needs to be that the production of that thing causes pollution, and they want to make money on it, right? Where you're going to have that in a socialist society, you're going to have that in a lot of societies, right? We need to figure out how do we link our desires with our productive capabilities, or sorry, how do we link our desires with the ecology that we happen to find ourselves in? I know that was long, but and also I'm going to put a link into Prime's chat to a fantastic book about the Cultural Revolution that actually has an entire chapter about the ecology of the Maoist revolution, revolutionary China, that I find to be a very interesting analysis of how climate change can go bad in a sort of more centrally planned direction.
I think we're going to have some interesting disagreements here, but thank you for that, Kobe. All right, let's go to Clive.
Okay, so just real quick, while it's still fresh in my head, like some of what I agree with most of what Kobe just said there. But yeah, corporations are going to produce products that are in demand, of course, from people, and that's why they're going to produce them, and then that's the incentive to pollute. But then there's like the production of those products, the pollution that's caused by the production of those products could likely be reduced in a lot of different ways, and precautions could be taken so that those things don't happen. So for instance, like BP spilling oil in the Gulf of Mexico, there are precautions that could have been done to prevent that, and they were warned about some of the dangers of their activities and what could be caused there. So they still could have produced the products that people want without actually causing like environmental disasters. To like my opening ideas, we usually like just conceptually, we usually don't like allow people to sell products that get people sick, or at least we regulate this type of things that cause harm to people. I don't see any reason why idealistically we wouldn't want to also regulate production that causes people to get sick or causes health problems. But one of the biggest problems that we have is that the like top polluters are usually energy producers. And when we talk about instilling like a corporate death penalty, me just kind of straw manning that idea is like, okay, overnight, you fucked up, boom, you're done, you're shut down. Well, we have to think about, okay, if we shut down an energy producer, how is that going to affect the people that are relying on that energy? We don't want people to be, freezing out in the cold and have, out in below zero temperatures or some shit like that. We also have to think about the economic impact for like poor families if the cost of energy is going to go up. And so there's other things that or other consequences to that I do think that we have to consider. And that's why I think some of the other alternatives, like, well, I won't go over it because other people mentioned other alternatives. I think other alternatives might actually be better than that. And I'll leave it there.
Okay. I definitely have a response to that one. I think it's gonna be a lot of fun.
Why, you always argue back against me.
No, which is another reason why I have you here.
Feel free, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Touring. Definitely really want to hear what you have to say on this particular topic. Go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, mostly yes, I'm okay with it. On the caveat that we go more along like riverboat jacks, or like even if it has to be a nonprofit model. But instead of just completely canceling a business, and giving it a death penalty, it would be a seizure of assets and a seizure of the means of production into refolding into continuing labor to function and like service those instruments and tools. One thing that I could maybe think about would be like the Sacklers. The Sacklers could have been given basically like a corporate death penalty. Their IP could have been taken. They could have been disallowed to potentially manufacture those goods or pharmaceuticals for any longer. I think that when you go to the oil industry, if there's like an oil patch that's heavily polluting and it doesn't meet safety codes time and time again, maybe we can get into some kind of way where you're going to be seizing specific wells from companies, and you could allow them to keep like other wells operating until they show some type of ability that they can like actually exist within the system anymore. But we just banned Sha'Carri Richards from going to the Olympics for smoking a joint, and Pete Rose still isn't allowed in the Hall of Fame for doing like some simple gambling stuff. So like we live in this like extremely punitive culture in these other realms and in these other endeavors, and then at the same time like we're allowing a fire to erupt in Mexico, or we're allowing PG&E to continue to do unsafe electrical practices in California that's leading to more and more wildfires, or so we're like there's so many asymmetries that just don't really align. And I was in a little bit of agreement with Connor when he said like let's bring back the trust busting, but if you do the trust busting, is another VC company or SPAC or private money going to go in and buy it and keep running it under the same auspices? So I'm much more for like a deconstruct, dismantle, disassemble, make a public company, make a co-op company, make a not-for-profit company. You can do a salary management, you can excise the shareholder, you could remove the profit motive, and I think there's just really a lot that could be done within these realms.
Thank you. Doobie.
So first off, Sha'Carri Richards and Pete Rose knew the rules before they signed up to do that shit. So that's on them. I think bitching about that is really stupid. But to the topic, this already kind of exists. Well, it already does exist. It's called forced dissolution or involuntary dissolution. So when the state comes in and says, hey, the owners of this company are doing illegal shit. They've violated our laws. They're not paying their taxes, whatever it is, and they can force the company to dissolve. Or in some cases they just take away their the LLC filing, right? They know it's the LLC charter, so they actually can't do business anymore, and then the company falls apart anyway, right? And then suddenly, the owners of this company are open to being like personally sued for shit the company did because they lose all the protections that their LLC or corporation had, right? So this already exists. It's not like this magical thing that we need to like institute. It already exists. It's very hard to do because I mean I think reasonably there are a lot of protections and a lot of like hurdles that the courts need to get over to make this happen. That being said, I don't know if it's the best thing to do. I think you guys know how much I like nationalizing companies, right? but in this case, I think dissolving a company might be the wrong way to go. Because the people that you're upset with, the people at the top who made those bad decisions, they already have their millions. They're going to fuck off with some golden parachutes somewhere else, right? And what you're really doing is screwing over everyone who works for them, all the thousands of employees at the bottom, right? So it makes more sense to me that if something like this were to happen, you just nationalize it and then sell off the assets over time, so the state takes control of the company entirely and sells off the assets, or sells it off as one thing to some other company. That seems fine to me if you want, because that'll allow the company to mostly stay together. Won't screw over the employees as much. You still take away the control from the people who are fucking up, and then you can go after them criminally and put them in jail. I'm totally fine with that too.
Interesting. All right, over to the panel.
So there was lots of crazy stuff that was said, especially
and one thing I had to disagree with Kobe a little bit in saying that everybody does their part of pollution. The United States military is the world's largest pollution emitter, and I'm in the home of NORAD at the moment right now. I can see Pikes Peak from like the backyard that I'm sitting in, and I can see all the like airplanes that they're testing and so forth. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows U.S. military #1 CO2 emitter and greenhouse gas emitter planetary worldwide.
Okay. Gambit, what did you disagree with, Doobie?
Yeah, I disagree with a lot of from a lot of people, but just tackling Doobies first. one, taking away the company would definitely hurt the either shareholders if it's a public company, or if it's a private company, the continued income and all of that from that company is making, they would definitely be losing something. I understand that you're saying
Yeah,
that
of
they've
course.
made some money, but in addition to this, you could also fine them X amount of dollars. But like the
Are you
shareholders
talking about
are the most.
finding the company or the individuals at the top who made the decisions that polluted the
Or you can
environment?
find the company before you dissolve it, and then those individuals that have the money in the company will be responsible for paying it. So yes, it might not.
What are we hoping to gain by dissolving the company?
We are hoping to. So my thought process in this, and like it seems like y'all were straw manning like super hard, is that these are companies who continually fail certain regulations and continue to do bad things, or like this isn't like, okay, you made one mistake, let's go dissolve your company, right? Like I don't think anybody
Right.
was making that claim, right? So these are for companies who repeatedly break violations and seem to
So,
not care about the fines.
question then for you, Gambit, to clarify,
Mhm.
because I think that we're going to be on a different. We're having a clarifying question. Okay, when you say
Mhm.
dissolve, are we just going to allow that asset to just sit there? So let's say that you built like a huge, let's say it's like a natural gas facility, and they haven't been following code, they haven't been following any of the guidelines and so forth. Are you just wanting to dissolve it completely, just allow that to sit there? Because I would disagree, thinking you have a big carbon sink into this. This is a lot of jobs. This is a lot of machinery. That's where I want to go more of the nationalization, the nonprofit or the co-op. Go ahead.
Well, I
So
think
that's
another business could buy this organization after it's dissolved, right? We can't bar people from participating in our capitalist system, but we could bar that specific LLC, and it's
Right.
along the lines of what Doobie was saying. So yeah, I don't think that like the assets are frozen and can never be touched, right? I think that something will happen, something will come of those assets, but that current management company with this LLC, S corp, whatever, could not do anything with those assets. They'll be forced to render them back to, I don't know what authority, right? But yeah, I think that dissolution is a appropriate task for repeated encounters of this type. Where do y'all actually disagree? Because
We'll go to Shadows, Counter, and Jack.
Okay, so two things. One, first of all, I mean, this is a little pedantic, but it's not going to be like an LLC or a proprietorship that's committing this kind of stuff. It's probably going to be something that's incorporated. But two, when it comes to the fines, like if we have a certain regulation where it's like you're not allowed to do this, and we make it clear that like, oh, there's this fine, maybe a way to disincentivize it is to, rather than have a set fine on it, say it depends on the situation, and then we can just totally just like, when they actually commit this, unlawful act because we have regulations against it, we can just fine them up the ass. I think that's the thing here. Like, I mean, because I've been researching a lot of healthcare for the past week, and I've been trying to find out stuff on why, like, healthcare companies aren't transparent. I don't know why in this area, why the government can't be transparent and be like, it depends on the situation. And then just totally do an absurd number.
All right. Well, okay. So, and then to piggyback, basically on this subject, my major concern, and oftentimes what I find whenever I hear the word nationalization, is basically my concern is always the concentration of power. Any government that is like capable of just being like, oh, you fucked up, we're nationalizing your company, we're going to redistribute this entire part of the market. That's a government that's way too fucking powerful. And then on top of that, not just that. But you guys are basically not even thinking about how this could be manipulated. Corporate capture is a fundamental political concept in which corporations basically infiltrate, or regulatory capture is where they infiltrate the government in order to basically use regulation in order to push their competitors out of the market. There's absolutely no reason that I see that nationalization wouldn't just be another tool in the bucket for like somebody to be like, oh, well, BP had an oil spill, so we're going to go ahead and nationalize all their state-run assets. Oh, turns out that the person who was elected to the EPA is somebody who was, basically lobbied to by like Texaco or fucking ExxonMobil or some shit. This is absolutely a fucking blind spot that could be exploited by very rich people to take out their competition.
Speaking of oil
Seems
spill,
like
that
fear-mongering,
recent
yeah.
oil spill, was a Mexican owned corporation. Keep in mind, it was owned by the Mexican state.
Yeah, I was about to say, be specific. It was nationalized. And
yeah,
they
it was
still
a
fucked
nationalized
it up.
corporation. So like that doesn't like help with the problems that can occur.
Wait, but I thought if you nationalize stuff, then all the problems go away.
I don't think anybody said that.
Yeah.
Not Prime. Connor, this seems like fear-mongering, given that this law is already on the books. The state can already come in and dissolve corporations.
Yeah, okay, so hold on.
So if what you're saying is true, why isn't this happening all the time?
Okay, is it true that, well, I mean, I actually have an analogy that you're probably gonna like just fine. But okay, are they saying that they can dissolve it, or are they saying that the state can seize it for their own purposes and their own use?
Well, currently the state can dissolve a corporation. Right?
Okay, you didn't answer my question. Can they seize it for their own use? Can they say, hey, BP Mobile, you can't run this anymore. This is nationalized. This is now our shit.
Yeah, actually,
no, I'm sure there are. I'm sure that.
Yeah.
No.
Yeah, there are mechanisms in which there are mechanisms that the state can use to nationalize a company. Yes, of course. But and also, a state can also come in and dissolve a company.
You're not answering the question.
Wait, hold on. Wait, I am. Wait, I am answering the question.
Can a company be seized and used because of
the answer is probably yes. We can run it through like
the answer is both. The answer is yes to both.
Okay, but your example, or at least Riverboat Jack's example, was during wartime, which basically means that there's an exigent circumstance. What you guys are talking about.
Would the death of the planet not be an exigent circumstance?
That's actually a really fucking good point. But like at the same time, we're also talking about like peacetime normal economy shit. And here's the other thing. It's like this is kind of like I don't know. It's like we need a fly swatter, and you guys want to drop like a fuel air bomb or something. Like this is what's going on in this fucking conversation.
Not exactly. There have been so many opportunities for any of these companies to come clean and actually do decent business practices.
Okay, so what are you talking about? Because it sounds like you have something specific in mind.
Well, I guess it would just be like pipeline spills or opioid addiction, or just like the amount. Okay, so it takes me back to the Remington 700 case. The Remington rifle, you might know more about this one than I do. They had like a faulty trigger for how many dozens of years? I think it was like 40 years, 50 years, 60 years, where like there would be a faulty fire on the trigger, and then people would take it to what you wanted to do, Shadows. They would take it to litigation. It would go to litigation. They would pay a fine. The judge would seal the court documents, and the public wouldn't be allowed to know that there was any kind of like bad going on with the product, and they continued to make the product time and time again. And there ended up being like 200 some shootings because of this thing. It happened with airbags. It happened with opioids. It happened with oil and so forth. So we've left it go to the legal system at the moment. And what happens time and time again is court documents get sealed. The public doesn't find out about the misdeed that's going on. And then it just kind of continues to be done again and again. We do have to think of, go ahead.
But that's kind of weird to me that you would say that, because as far as I know, over time, airbags have been implemented. Gun safety has improved over time. Like, you know, like all of these things that we're talking about have statistically improved significantly over time without the government nationalizing Remington or nationalizing oil companies.
I'm talking about the specific, I'll give it back to Kobe, but the specific fact that we're allowing these companies to continue doing the same abuse time and time again. Yes, potentially the entire I shouldn't use that word. The entire system may have become safer with airbags and so forth, but we still allowed repeat violators to do the same misdeed time and again, was what I was saying.
It sounds like you recognize the mechanism that allowed that to happen, though. And that's the only thing you need to correct, which is like a fly swatter and analogy. That Connor went.
Well, I kind of getting back to what you're saying, Connor. I don't think you really addressed. It feels like you kind of gitch gallop. I don't want to say gitch gallop. You move the goalposts. You said that rich people would come in and use this system to basically take over the corporation to other corporations. Like basically, like they become pirates, paying off politicians, seizing companies, and whatever. But this is already on the books. So if that's the case.
Okay, but I feel like you're being...
Wait, no, I'm not done.
I'll wait.
And you said earlier that these politicians are already owned by these corporations. If this is the case, why aren't we seeing companies being nationalized and sold off to other corporations all the time?
Because I feel like you're combining terms now. So the term that you used earlier that I heard was dissolution. Dissolution does not mean nationalization to me. So maybe
those are different things.
Okay, so those are different things.
Which is why.
So we've already. Sorry, GSU. Sorry, I just want to parse it out. So Riverboat Jack said that we have nationalized in the past, and there are examples of nationalization. And I think this is an interesting point because we don't agree on the severity or the threat of global warming, but it could be a species and planetary existential crisis that actually does warrant nationalization. But then that's kind of the question is I'm sorry to move the topic, but is global warming a species and planetary threatening global crisis to the point that we need to nationalize the economy?
Oh boy. So we got to go to Jack, Kobe, and then Shadows. But I find it interesting that you think it has to be that the species has to be in danger before we challenge a corporation. That's amazing. But
I didn't say that.
That sounds very reasonable.
We'll let Jack handle it. Go ahead, Jack.
Oh my god.
So one of the ideas that's been kind of floated around on the panel so far is like that by pursuing legal fights against these companies that we will have methods to find them into behaving better, and that will largely take care of the problem. And the reality is that often in this country, even with like the full extent of resources of the state at our disposal, the fines that we inflict on companies, even the biggest ones, like the biggest ones in history, right? Pale in comparison to the actual damage that these companies do with their business practices and pursuits, knowing full well during the entire run of their business for decades upon decades that they are poisoning people or otherwise contributing to a generalized increasing level of suffering in the world, right? Like a good example of this is how the US government fined tobacco companies like $206 billion, right? For selling cigarettes and knowingly giving people cancer. But when we look at the actual damage that causes on a monetary level, that amount, like the cancer that has given people costs the US economy like $300 billion a year. So like the cost, like we might pat ourselves on the back. Good job, we got a $200 billion settlement, pales in comparison to the ongoing costs that have already been absorbed by the public. Now, when we're talking about climate change issues, that is like on an entirely different scale. We're talking not just hundreds of billions of dollars, we're talking trillions of dollars. And that's something that oil companies have known about since before 1980. Exxon had their own report in 1979 about how the burning of fossil fuels was going to lead to a planet that is substantially changed and damaged if they didn't do anything. And instead of taking action on that report, they buried it and actively spent billions of dollars in propaganda to convince people that fossil fuels were safe for another 15 to 20 years after even non-corporate scientists came out and started spreading this information. And that's something that has put us now in a position where we're going to be suffering not like $1 trillion a year globally. We're talking like tens of trillions of dollars per year globally. We're like cities in America are going to be underwater in our lifetimes.
I'll be very fast about this. To back up Jack's point, there was actually a woman named Eunice Foote in the 1800s that did experiments about finding out what carbon dioxide was going to do to temperatures, and the research was actually verified in the later 1800s. So this has been a known phenomenon for a very long time. I just wanted to make sure that people knew that it was a woman first that did the research, and that it was also 100 years even before Exxon had gotten into it. But it was a very in-depth study from ExxonMobil as well.
Yeah, okay, but it's just that. Yeah, this is an existential threat to society on every continent, in every place that humans live. Kind of to Kobe's point at the beginning, like we all share one global ecosystem now, and we are collectively destroying it with the massive aid of these fossil fuel corporations. And that's not even taking into account like the air pollution that people breathe from fossil fuels that kills like millions of people every year. That's not taking into account the the massive amounts of diaspora that are going to be produced by climate disasters. We're talking about just like basic bitch problems that are going to happen as a result of climate change.
So
The knock-on effects are incalculable.
Okay, so this is part of my problem with this conversation, because it's hard to parse out through the murky fog of war of history exactly like kind of what the motivation here, and also like an alternate reality that we could have existed in. So let's say that like ExxonMobil scientists create the global global warming report in like 1972, and like ExxonMobil people just basically like shit their pants instantaneously. They're like, oh my god, we are going to nuke the fucking planet. This global resource that we are creating, that everybody's completely reliant on for automobiles and petroleum products and plastics and electronics and like all that kind of stuff. Literally, the lifeblood of the modern world is actually killing the planet. Yeah. So basically, my question here is like, let's say that they had inverted and they took 10% of their like global profits and they had invested that in clean energy or clean energy research instead. Where do you think we would be right now if they had done that instead of pushing that off onto the taxpayer and propagandizing the public into thinking that it was safe?
Well, I think that largely the ongoing effect of actively covering it up and actively fighting against any of the opportunities that we've had to change our reliance on fossil fuels has done incalculable amounts of damage. We could be like living in a world where like for the past 40 years, we've been building nuclear reactors. You know, we could be living in a world where we, for the past 40 years, have been actively investing more in battery tech, in solar and wind tech. And instead of like solar and wind largely being something that have only like come to feasibility in like the last 10 years-ish, we could have been doing this far, far sooner, and we could have avoided so much more damage, decades of damage. If we had been doing this sooner.
I guess my thing is so I could like parse it apart or ask a whole bunch of technological fucking roundabout questions. I don't want to do that. I guess my question is, what's the problem? Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, this will maybe. I just want to give something for context. We're nationalizing our water. Like the federal government is kind of determining, where you live in Iowa, what kind of water you get access to. Sometimes downstream rivers get access to different streams. So like it's already a thing that's kind of being done as far as like mineral rights for like us, our like land under our feet and under our ground and so forth. Yet we continue to allow private companies to just keep extracting oil and so forth. So if it's nationalized but give to public ownership, if it's like turn into a nonprofit and like I don't know, allow by sortition the board of directors to go on to like that via a nonprofit or something, like something has to give that isn't just fining people. Because
I want to ask this question because I think you nailed it on the head. Okay, so we turn it over to fucking public ownership. Everybody decides that global warming is a fucking existential threat, and 51% of the population votes to freeze petroleum production overnight. Now what? Because basically there are so many externalities to that fucking like kind of shift that I can think of off the top of my fucking head. That would basically wreck the fucking economy.
Yeah,
Wait. So in this hypothetical, like you're thinking that like 51% of the country would vote to just like stop oil production tomorrow and stop all fossil fuel use tomorrow? Because like
I'm trying to figure out what the fuck y'all want, basically.
What we want is a sensible transition to like nuclear, wind, solar, literally anything that will help us to not kill the planet.
So that's not nationalizing those companies then, though, right? So that's the confusion of the message. Because when you say nationalize the companies, I'm like, okay, they're still going to produce the pollution.
First off, I never said that we should nationalize anything.
You said co-ops, which is even worse.
How is a co-op worse than nationalization?
Because when people meme about co-ops, it's silly, right? Like co-ops only exist in certain industries. And
why do co-ops only exist in certain industries, Gambit?
It only exists in certain industries because it seems as if those work conditions only work in certain fields. It's not true that
co-ops only exist in certain industries because mostly the co-op structure is limited by investment. Because private investors don't want to invest in democratic co-ops because they don't get as much of a return. Therefore, when like a bunch of people get together and go to the bank,
on the co-op thing.
I just want to explain this.
Here, okay?
Just want to explain this real quick. co-ops are limited by investment. You can't go to the bank and get a bank to loan you money for a democratic workers like startup. That's
not?
why most
Because there's no
democratic
history.
co-ops are
Okay.
agricultural.
Okay.
The agricultural
God.
sector
We
has
gotta
the
go-
capital
Places
built in.
working at
We
scale.
will talk about that. Gambit and
No,
Jack,
this was
please.
a fundamental part of the opening, right?
Yeah, I know,
Like-
but I do have two other people who've been waiting a very long time. So let's get to them first.
We have to. Okay.
Don't worry. We got plenty of time here. All right. So we got Kobe, and then we have Shadows.
Yeah, so something that I'm noticing is when you seek to solve. One second, let me try to like mute my game audio. Okay. Okay. When you are trying to solve a systematic problem, you can address it at the root, or you can address it at the fruit. Right? We can agree that there is a problem in a system, but we can agree that maybe the system overall is better than the negatives, and that we can deal with that negative externality. I would argue. I've had some of my friends who are trans tell me that they're worried about the idea of a nationalized healthcare system, completely nationalized, because hypothetically a Republican government could come in and restrict trans healthcare, abortion, stem cell research, all kinds of things, and that's very true. But I would argue that I would say that we have to focus on the negative fruit. We can deal with that issue and reap the benefits of the systematic solution. It seems that some people are kind of jumping between, in this conversation on both sides here, are jumping between root solutions and fruit solutions. We're talking about, a corporate death tax seems to me to be a fruit solution. When we have one of these, if we have this big tick on the system that is refusing to cooperate with regulation, that's refusing to do this, we have to deal with that. Versus the idea that the cause of this, at least in part, the cause of the climate crisis is this profit motive, and that a democratically run company would not have as much of these inclinations to pollute. That's a much more of a root thing, and so I think that's where the bit of there's the disconnect. I also think that it's important to remember that people don't just pollute because of profit; they pollute because of necessity, right? Like there's a lot of one thing I think that Turing keeps trying, I think he was going to, he added once before, and I think it's kind of been bugging him, is that it is true, and I kind of put it this way earlier, it is true that there is not an equal distribution of climate responsibility. Certain industries, obviously like oil and shipping, are significantly more contributors to the climate crisis than, I don't know, something like, local gardening or something like this, right? But I would argue that, again, that's, it's because there's different incentives to pollute in different industries. There's some industries that you can make a lot of profit without being polluting a lot, and there's some industries that profit and pollution is almost like 100% tied. I have a couple of things that are a little bit kind of like what's the word I'm looking for? Kind of like a scattershot that I think just things I wanted to respond to. I heard somebody talk about the idea like, well, fines have never been enough in the past. I would agree, but I would argue we've never taken this seriously enough. Most of the times, the fines have basically been to make constituents shut up. I would argue, to go to my next point, somebody in the chat brought up the idea that poor people can't sue these big companies. That's absolutely true. There's a situation going on right now where Chevron went to Brazil, Colombia, Bolivia, something like that, and polluted I think 5 indigenous nations' land, and then just yeeted them. Went polluted it, and we're like goodbye. And then what is an indigenous nation in the fucking jungles of Bolivia going to do to Chevron, right? But we could, if we had something like we have the EPA here in America. If we had as some of the more eco extremists call it, the green police. If we had an industry that could actually had some teeth to do something about this, I think that we could fix it. That though would be a root solution, not a fruit solution, and that would be something that would not necessarily deal with like the democratic control issue. That would be like just a further regulation, which I understand. And the last one is that climate, which we haven't been talking about enough, and I know that Turing will have a lot more to say on this. Energy is where we've been talking here, and energy is just one part of the climate puzzle. There are a lot of other industries that pollute, including agribusiness, and including agribusiness, including meat production. And the main reason we do meat, we could be vegans. All of us could eat tofu and seitan and eat bugs and shit, and we could have no meat. But we want to eat meat because we love our cheeseburgers. We love our big hot dogs. We love our sausages and our meats and our steaks and our salmon. We love this, and that's one of the reasons. So we have to remember that it's not just the profit; it's also human incentive. One more thing. And going back to my point at the very beginning about social ecology, we have to make sure that we are balancing. That's part of it. Is that part of a social ecology is balancing the human desire for things.
I think Kobe had all of that nuance, and what you forgot about is that if you just make it a co-op, all problems solve themselves.
Oh my god.
Oh my
Yeah.
god.
You forget
That is
that.
exactly what I said. It solves all the problems. It's basically a magic spell.
Yeah, if we basically
Casting meteor in
nationalize it
Final
or
Fantasy.
just call it a co-op, all of a sudden all of those problems go away. It's
Can I
such a
actually-
silly
Yeah.
thing.
Could I ask River? Here's maybe a compromise.
Mhm.
Can we probably compromise that perhaps a worker co-op is going to be less incentivized to pollute their local community?
Right.
But perhaps, sorry, just to add to that, perhaps we might not see that so much when we see these larger like going down the chain of the great chain of being, right? Like if my worker co-op fucks over people in Bangladesh, that's a lot harder for me to give a shit if it's somebody down the street.
Right. And so that's why I said this would probably be like, hey, turn it into a co-op first. And if that doesn't work, if that keeps bad outcomes happening, then you pursue the dissolution. That's why I said it would probably be like a one step among several towards dissolution. That's what I said in my opening
Still
statement.
have the continued
Let's
investment
go.
from all of the capitalists. This is so.
So let's go to shadows and then
Yes,
counterpoints.
Capitalists are heavily
Okay,
incentivized
okay.
in worker co-ops.
Can I go out the corner?
Yeah, sure.
Connor?
Okay. All right.
All right, cool.
Go ahead, shadows.
Okay, so first of all, I like Kobe's idea of like the U.S. getting involved with pollution in other areas. As some people know, I'm very pro world police. I don't know why we can't be the world police when it comes to pollution too. That
Because
sounds
we
pretty
can't clean
base.
up our own backyard first.
Well, okay.
I'm
and-
okay with having a very dirty backyard and still telling other people what to do.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But when it comes to like this stuff, when it comes to like, you know, fines not being enough, and whatnot, I mean, I don't see why we don't like increase the numbers. Like I said, like we can very drastically increase these numbers. Like there's a reason why we've been talking a lot about like implementing a carbon tax, is because a carbon tax is generally a good idea. Like it's not working as well as people would probably have it hoped in Canada when they implemented it, but it still does something. It still helps move forward. So I think like when it comes to these regulations that companies are violating, we just need to drastically increase costs or just sue them. Like so. And then
Okay,
there
but
was,
if
like,
okay, so let's say they actually do that. Let's say that we just sue these companies into oblivion. Do you know who gets cut? Fucking labor gets cut. And then we get automated out of the system. So yeah, if you go at the quote like lifeblood of what this corporation is or isn't, whatever, it's not going to be the shareholders that deal with the pain or the problem. It's not going to be the C-suite. It's not going to be the board. All that's going to happen is they're going to fire. What they're going to do is what they did at the Lowe's or at the Frito-Lay's company. They're going to try to take the older workers. They're not going to give them raises. They're going to hire in younger people at a lower wage, and they're going to fire the older people. So just by fining these companies, you're also going to be greatly impacting labor of said companies. So that doesn't exactly work. Additionally, every single time that you try to fine these fuckers, they just hire more and more corporate attorneys, and people are linking me in my channel all these times of like, oh, we pled down from this fine to that fine, and we pled down from that fine to that fine. Like it hasn't worked.
What would the prescription be then?
I mean,
'Cause,
I'm for at a minimum like open sourcing things, partial public ownership, partial nationalization of different assets from within said industry. You could even begin to take shares from the C-suite to a potential position where they don't have like complete like voting control of the company anymore. I mean, I'm in the moment of my life. You know, you were talking about how like energy is just like one thing of the climate solution. I'm in the moment of my life where I'm standing in front of a huge pasta bowl and I just cook 10 pounds of pasta every day and throw every noodle against the wall. And then if like 3 of them stick, I want to see if there's like anything useful out of that noodle.
Let's go to shadows. Actually, shadows, finish your point if you have one. If you have something else, and then we'll go to counter, GSU, and then Clav.
I mean, I did have another point, but I forgot it because we were talking so much about fucking co-ops. To be honest, at a point, I do want to point out, though, when Gambit first responded to that, he said something about, like, why are we memeing about co-ops? At this point, it kind of does feel like a meme. I don't know why everything turns into co-ops now. It's fucking annoying. It's so insane.
Why does
man.
everything turn into just find them then, Fivehead? Come on, if you want to have like your little fantasy island, let other people have their fantasy island as well. Not that actually the co-op is a fantasy island because I support it, but come on, like you're living in a land that doesn't work. We've tried regulatory corporate land forever, and it hasn't happened.
Let's go to
well, just respond to that. I guess it's like I'm somewhat sympathetic to that critique, but I feel like the problem we're running into is that we have like a system that we've seen to be less than effective, which is like regulating our capitalism, versus a system that we can't demonstrate is going to solve the problem. And I understand that we're getting close to a Hail Mary solution, but I don't know. Co-ops is not the Hail Mary place I would go to if we're going to go that direction.
Let's go to
again. Why?
I'm so sorry, Jack.
I don't know why this turns into like a Hail Mary solution when again we're talking about whether or not we should end companies. All I said was, hey, step one, make it a democratic worker co-op. Much less likely to fuck people over.
Let's go
which
to
is very true.
Counter.
We don't know if that's true,
Counter. Just you then clap. Counter, please.
Yeah, and it is a lot easier, I would say, like from the right wing or from the center, basically, to be like, well, have you thought about this externality? Well, have you thought about this problem? And Kobe kind of mind fucked me a little bit because he was like, there's root and fruit problems, and we should categorize these things properly. And if we don't categorize, we're just going to jump all over the place. And I'm like, God damn it. I think like half the problems I'm bringing up are like root and fruit simultaneously. So what's weird is there's this concept that I want everybody and their mom to write down, which is called Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I misapply it all the time. I hope everybody becomes familiar through my misapplication. But it basically says physiological, security, social, ego, self-actualization. It's how human beings basically orient their lives as they climb through life. And basically what it says is that you're not going to give a shit about getting a job if your social life is a fucking mess, if you can't feed yourself, if you can't maintain housing, like all that kind of stuff. It's basically like a very simple application. But I extrapolate this idea out to humanity in general. And to give you a root and fruit problem simultaneously, the American military, as Turing News pointed out, is like the #1 global emitter of like carbon emissions or some shit like that. At least that's what he said, right? Well, the way that I view that is that the American military is a necessary part of global capital and global economy as we understand it at this time. Security is the second tier. It's necessary in order for people to perform social functions. Without security, you can't perform social functions. And these social functions were reliant on the economy. We're literally all talking on computers that were fucking like mined from plastics in fucking Venezuela, spliced with oil in fucking Saudi Arabia, and then shipped back to the United States. And the rare earth minerals were fucking captured by like Bolivian fucking death squads that executed children and like harvested their organs and then like kept half of the kids to fucking mine the fucking lithium out of the goddamn ground and then give it to all of us rich cunts in the fucking West so we could have this conversation. So what I'm saying is when you do these things like, I'm not trying to mean, but like cooperatives or nationalization or rethinking the way that we do these logistic structures or whatever, what you're talking about is you're talking about like a fucking chain of logistics that presently exists. And you're just like, we'll just take it over. And once we take it over, the right people will be in power and then they'll do the right thing. And what I don't think almost done. The problem that I see here is basically like the people who want to nationalize it don't know fuck all about the goddamn logistics that go into international fucking supply chains. A lot of these things are not even understood by the people who run international supply chains. They're literally like fixated on market forces and they focus on single variables that even they don't understand. So to just say that we're going to take this thing over and not fuck it up, to me, sounds like a bunch of leftist horse shit that fucking killed millions of people in the 20th century. But final point, and then I'll let it go, and Turing News, feel free to respond. But Shadows, you mentioned carbon tax. You guys have to realize that you share a political space with a bunch of right-wing cunts like myself. And the word tax might as well be like the word Voldemort to fucking conservatives, okay? I'm using liberal terms so you guys understand me. So basically what you need to do is you need to think about words that work for capitalists. So for instance, building externalities into products. That is a sentence that appeals to capitalists because you're not saying that the government is going to tax CO2 emitters. What you're saying is we're going to build the price of pollution into the product itself because it's an externality that is not presently calculated. That would give a fucking like econ major a fucking rage boner. and all these.
I need to respond to that because
very briefly. Another sentence that capitalists would like would be that if we don't fucking tax these corporations, we're gonna have 1917 part 2. It's not gonna be fucking pretty for the rich people. Okay, so it's tax these people or.
But the rich people, okay, but the rich people will just hire private armies and machine gun you all to death. So I mean,
hold on, wait. Sorry, just a brief anecdote. Historically, that's not true. The Tsar brought in Cossacks into Moscow to put down the workers' strike during the Russian Revolution, and the Cossacks went with the people. The Cossacks turned with the workers, and the policemen didn't. The foreign mercenaries don't actually work as much. They also talk about this in Metal Gear Solid 5, which is a documentary you should play.
Okay. Also, okay. I need
amazing game.
I'm just gonna go on this one.
Sorry.
Some things that I would look into are like I'm all for trying to get certain technologies that I consider to be massively beneficial for food production and energy production to be purchased and then open sourced and then run as some kind of nonprofit. So there's a company right now called Heliogen that's working on, it's basically mirror beams to a central focal point, heat it up to a really high temperature, do some electrolysis, get hydrogen, create liquid hydrogen, create energy from it. The company's about to go public through a SPAC for like a $2 billion acquisition from Athena. I think that would be a worthwhile investment for the government to purchase, open source all the technology, and then have run in a nonprofit setting and have it run in like a public ownership setting. I think it'd be good to do with App Harvest, who's doing fully automated integrated vertical farming or hydroponic farming in like a 60-acre facility with rain capture. So I think that in addition to finding disassembling some of these other companies, I think that there needs to be certain technologies that are purchased before venture capital purchases them to be open source to allow more people to begin to build like these systems that we're going to need for sustainability and for regeneration.
So, okay, but I'm going to respond to this. Can I respond to this directly?
And then Shadows and Jack can respond to you directly. Hold on, no. They'll respond to him directly, and then we'll go to you, TSU. Don't worry.
Okay.
A lot of time.
Here's my fucking problem. Here's my problem, Torian. I agree with you. And on top of that, I had this awesome anarchistic conversation with fucking Demon Mama about how people should be more communalistic, how they should focus on their communities, and climate crisis might be a problem that has a community solution where you can start implementing these open source things in order to deal with community problems. Because if the international food logistics system breaks down, you're going to need local resources, including like vertical farming and greenhouses. But do you know what the thing is? While I agree with you, and I'm probably going to try to implement that in the next 30 years, especially if global warming gets worse, all of the people on fucking Twitch right here, they're not going to do that. You know what they're going to fucking do? They're going to come to fucking Twitch panels. They're going to create memes based off of the fucking Twitch panels with like my face on the fucking soy person and Riverboat Jack's fucking face on the gamer person. And then they're going to meme up until the apocalypse, and then they're going to starve to death. So I think you're right. But I think a lot of people will not take advantage of the open source shit that you're talking about.
Okay, so
Okay.
Shadow and then Jack to respond directly, then we got to go to TSU and then Clav.
Okay, so I don't know why, Connor, you made this point when you know that when you're making this point towards me, you are talking to a capitalist who is literally an econ major. Yes, I very much know how to get an econ boner. I've gotten a lot of them. But yes, I know how to talk to capitalists. And guess what? I don't care if conservatives are scared of the word taxes, okay? Freedom of is more important than freedom from. I don't give a fuck if you are scared of government taxes. This is what we do with externalities, okay? You tax negative externalities and you subsidize positive ones. This is not advanced economics. That's literally the point I'm trying to make. And then also for Tory News, you're talking about like, oh, just tax them, just fine them 5 ed. Okay, so my thing is, the reason why I feel like I need to increase is because it's going to be a negative thing. The only reason why I feel like a corporate death penalty is an idea here is because the idea that if you break it up, maybe the fines will then be enough of a disincentive for them to not do it. So if that's the case, with these larger corporations, I don't see why we just don't increase the fine by multiple folds to the point where it's a disincentive for these non-broken up corporations. Because the thing is, if this smaller one is going to work,
I keep interrupting.
Hold on. Let me.
Can you let
me finish?
No, I'm actually not going to, because you asked the question and there's a simple answer to it. There's actually certain types of civil litigation that have limits on the amount of payment that can be put out to a person. So you can actually have like certain payment caps on different types of litigation that you put against people, so corporations can be protected from it. So like there's just too many things in the way of like, yeah, okay, I'm agreeing with you that we could try to change the system and we can try to get bigger fines, but there are actually things that are put in place through the corporate capture of the legal system that don't allow that to take place.
So you're saying there are current systems in the legal barrier that prevent this type of increase?
Yes. In certain types of litigation, not all, but
that were instituted
Okay,
by our good
fair
friend Bastiat.
Wait, so
True.
I'm just
Oh, boy.
so
Wait, hold on.
Shadows.
Let's get okay. We gotta go to Jack, and then we're going to GSU, Clav, then we'll go to Doobie, all right?
Okay, so just real quick, I just want to point out that we've had a carbon tax being bandied about in the political sphere for literally the last like 30 some years. The head of NASA went to Congress in 1988, was like, global warming's happening and we need to do something about it. And Congress was like, hey, you know what? People on both sides and in corporations, they all seem to really be for this carbon tax thing. And guess what? Time and time again, it has been voted down in Congress, not just by Republicans, but also by Democrats. And while everyone says on paper that they're for it, it repeatedly gets shot down on a legislative basis. And we've gotten to the point now where, yeah, back in 1990, if I wasn't like a little sperm in my dad's testicle, I would have been for a carbon tax, okay? Like, but unfortunately, we've kind of passed the point where a carbon tax is going to get us where we need to go in the time that we have to avert like the worst of the crisis, right? So when we're talking about carbon tax now, like, sure, it's good. It'd be good if we passed a carbon tax now. It's not going to be good enough, however. And that's the problem that we are facing and have to deal with. That fines and carbon taxes are not going to save us in our current situation because we've put off doing them for the last 30 years and it's just too late now.
There's no one, nothing. There's nothing. There's no one solution. We could have full communism tomorrow. We have anarcho-capitalism, and it's going to have to be a wide variety of things.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking for my stats here, but for my facts and logic. But carbon whatever it's called, carbon taxes. Sorry, it's a good thing. That's a very effective thing. I know that you said that you would be for it, but I think that it's a big part of addressing it.
Mm-hmm.
So let's go to GSU Gambit. GSU Gambit, I know it's the case for me, but do all the sperm in your testicles, are they green as well? Green supporting?
Wait, what? What did I miss? What
Are
is
your
that?
sperm pro-environment?
Yeah.
Are your testicles
yes,
wearing little green sweaters?
I believe so. I believe
Green
so.
thumb? Nah, we're talking about green balls.
Okay. GSU.
Green dick?
Hey.
All right. All right. So, yeah, we talked about this with Venom Jesus before. Like the co-op meme is, I mean, it's so annoying because people try to bring it to every conversation, like somebody was saying earlier. So, like, people who work for co-ops make up like an infinitesimally small amount of our workforce. Of that workforce, like 90% of them work in the same industry. So the idea that we could look at any economic statistics of and there's also like a few companies hire 90% of the people that work at co-ops. So I want y'all to picture this. A very small percentage of our world is ran in co-ops. Of that, they are in a very small percentage of possible industries across the world. Of that, 90% of the workers work for almost the same corporation or the same group of corporations. So it's literally like, it's silly to say from any economic data that's available from basically 2 or 3 companies in like 1 or 2 industries, we can extract that and we can say this machine could power all of our very important businesses, blah, blah, blah. Like there's this meme.
Did anybody on this panel say that?
The idea of let's just co-opt them is that. And what's embedded in that is a bunch of nonsense, and I'll explain. There's this embedded concept of the rich are evil, right? The idea that if I just replace them with the workers, they'll guaranteedly come up with a better solution. All of this is invested in a bunch of like really silly ideas.
That's not the idea of a co-op.
There's no economic data.
None of what you
like
first off, none of
available.
the things that you've said have been accurate.
Everything is. You're saying
No,
that a company
absolutely not.
Listen, okay, if I can talk, I'll explain it again. Okay, you're saying that we should just co-opt a company that is serving in whatever capacity it is that's affecting our EPA. So embedded in that is you think that just because we democratize the workforce, that can account for all the externalities that Kobe and everybody else laid out, which is silly. I think you agree with that.
I
The
think
idea
that
that
it can account
just
for some of them. Yeah.
it's silly. It like what you'll
It's one
find
part
out
of a larger
what
solution.
you'll find out is that if you get more information in a lot of these industries where these things are being produced, a part of this is just a part of doing business in that sphere. So regardless of whether there's a CEO or a board or 5 people or 5 million people, a lot of these problems still exist.
Not
So it's a
entirely
silly
true.
meme.
Not entirely
No,
true. If the
it's
co-op
it's
wasn't
it's
open.
entirely
Democratic
true.
worker
Hold on,
co-ops
hold on, hold on,
reduce
hold on.
exploitation.
Okay, I'm pretty sure Gambit bought like some milk from like a worker co-op
No.
farm, and it was off. And he's like, I'm never gonna let
No,
co-ops
this
live it
is
down.
just silly, man. Yeah, it's big in farming, and there's a lot of things embedded in this. One, they are big in farming because of exactly what Riverboat Jack said earlier. A lot of it has to do with startup costs. There's no economic data to support that we would still have the same level of investment, publicly or privately, if we democratize other businesses in different genres. So if you go to a software engineering company and you try to democratize, a lot of the people that are in it for the money are now no longer there. So you don't necessarily have the capital to continue this nonsense. Let's co-op everything. There's a
people
bunch
who
of
are there for the money
different
are going to
problems.
make more money.
No, they're not. They're going to leave
Sure,
and go to things
they,
that
they can
actually
vote.
work.
They can vote on
They're not going
increasing
to
their
continue
wages.
this meme. No, you're assuming that they're going to continue the meme in your head, right? They're going to leave and go to
How is
things
it a
that
meme in
actually
my
work.
head? It's like you can look
Y'all
at
are
the
just gonna
research
argue about how
yourself. The
co-ops
research
work
shows
now.
that the amount of wages
The
that people
research
make in
shows
worker
that there's like
co-ops
3
is
or 4
higher.
companies. This is on 3 or 4 companies. This is not some
No, it's
vast
not
amount
in
of
3 or
data
4
available.
companies.
Oh, boy.
There are
This is
studies
silly. This is
over the
silly.
course of
What country do you
decades
want to use?
over
What country do you
hundreds
want
of
to use?
companies.
What country do you want to use?
Shadow and I can go back to yelling
Yeah.
at one another again. if
Why?
you want.
I
What does
actually
a
had- I
country
wanted
have
to
to
make-
do with a worker co-op? We have
Yeah.
worker
I just-
co-ops in the United States.
I just wanted to make
What-
two
So,
quick
what
comments.
economic
sorry.
data
No, wait.
available?
I want to give Jisoo a little bit of time here, but like do have to move on to back to like the other
Yeah.
part. So
So back to the main thing. So what Riverboat Jack said about co-ops, and I'm like forming a co-op. I'm giving away parts of my company right now because I believe in co-ops. But it's silly to say that, yeah, we can just do this to everything. So that idea is silly. The nationalized idea, I think Counterpoints hit on that very well. This will be used as a political tool, probably by people on this panel, to just take over companies. It's silly. The just find them more from shadows is absolutely silly because these people make fuck tons of money. Just like if you find me and I don't care, if you find these people who are literally the richest on the planet, they don't care about increasing the amount that you find them, unless it's going to put them into negative profits, which we don't even think that's realistic, right? We aren't going to find them so much that they can't make profit. So all of these ideas are silly. So the idea that makes sense is exactly what Prime was suggesting with this topic. There are some companies that can become so toxic that there is no fixing them, and dissolution is the best idea. What we want companies to do is we want the market to find a more amenable solution to these problems that produces less waste in our society.
This will be fast.
The
Who owns
solution is
who owns them if they're dissolved?
Nobody. I don't know how we go about distributing the assets. I don't know.
Okay, but this is a huge part of your thing because you're saying like dissolve. But if you dissolve and then sell into the private market, does that mean that the government nationalized it, dissolved it, and now they're selling the assets off? Or are you just like taking the property away from the ownership class and then you're going to sell it back into the private market? But then there's going to be all this money that's sitting there, and where does that money go? So like you're talking about basically national. Okay, so if you dissolve a company,
yes.
Okay, let's say that you take this $1 billion company and they have like $600 million of capital infrastructure investment, and the other 400 million is like their IP. So they're worth like a combined like billion overall. And you just completely dissolve the company. Now, are you just going to let all of that stuff sit there and rot and it can never be touched again? And or is it going to go on to, well, okay, so if you're going to sell it and if it's going to go onto the market, who then benefits from the sale of the company? Because if you're going to say, well, the public, the taxpayer would benefit from it.
We don't. I'm not saying the taxpayer would benefit from it. I never said this. What I'm saying is that potentially someone else could buy these assets, whatever it is, whatever the assets are, and that other company would potentially be the biggest beneficiary, right? Of course.
But no,
I'm not against that.
who would get the money from buying those assets? Because you're saying the assets aren't going to be owned by anybody, but they're
Oh no,
Well-
so what I said earlier, maybe you missed this, is we would fine whoever was running it some set amount, and then of course they would make money from selling the things. I'm not against that. I'm against the operation of that business. I'm not one of y'all that seek to just do damage to people that doesn't make sense. So I do understand that the sale of the assets would benefit the people of the company that's being dissolved. Absolutely. I don't run from that though. I
Okay.
don't think it's a bad problem.
So let's go to Clav, Doobie,
Can I
and
ask a quick
Clav,
question? Because I was
Clav,
kind of confused by that.
Clav, Doobie, and Shadows. We gotta move things along.
Alright.
We were waiting.
Yeah, so I mean, maybe this is just like some small brain take here, but like it seems like the things that you guys are talking about, I mean, like you can bicker over all those things, whatever details you guys are bickering over. At the end of the day, if we all agree that there's some kind of like global crisis that's going on, the only way to solve those things is to switch over to renewable energy, clean energy at the end of the day. So whether you nationalize something, co-op something, blah, 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 it doesn't matter what you're doing there. If you still are producing the same shit, you're still going to have these problems. So you have to switch to something clean. And that means that really good solutions that I think a lot of people are cool with would be, obviously clean energy incentives for businesses to invest in those things, tax breaks for clean energy, and moving our energy reliance into clean energy. And then you can do that and simultaneously do punishments for people who are causing crazy pollution. I still think, like, I know the BP example is like one of the most extreme, but like 11 fucking people died and like nobody went to prison. I feel like individuals can be held accountable for the harm that they are causing, as we very typically do. It doesn't mean that like somebody going and driving their car needs to be fined. You can fine people and you can put them in prison or whatever. And I think hitting the people that are at the top, the people that are in charge, that has it has a trickle down effect in how the business is going to run. So let's say that people in some energy company, they do whatever, like they're repeat offenders of this. So they're an offender of some type of energy regulation. They get fined in some way, shape, or form. They know that their company operates this way. They're aware of it. And then they continue to allow the company to operate that way. I do think that you should be able to prosecute those people. And I think that, anybody who... Oh shit, his sign just like completely made me lose track of what I was saying. I think that you should be able to prosecute those people. And then if those people are put out, the next group that comes in, because we keep talking about the next group that comes in is just going to go and repeat the same mistake. I don't think the next group comes in and repeats the same mistake and faces prison time and personal fines to themselves when they take over that business. And that just doesn't seem realistic. I don't think any business or anybody in charge of a business will operate that way.
Can I back Clav up real quick? Just basically, I work for a corporate structure. I'm a little fussy this week because some rough things are happening right now. Upper level corporate people are fucking spineless, and by that I mean they will do whatever allows them to wake up, put in a 50-hour week, and make criminal amounts of fucking money. So Clav is right. Like, if you fucking hit these people, it makes it less likely that you're going to hit these people because these are the people at the top. But if you hit these people with like arrests or fines or fuck with their ability to make money, the next generation that does come in is going to be very sensitive to that because they want to fucking continue to make money and not rock the boat 100%.
And part of the reason why these things aren't working right now when we talk about, because I know everybody's going, well, this isn't working. The guys who, when the BP oil spill happened, like the most harsh penalty that happened was like somebody had probation for 10 months. So these penalties are not being instituted.
Yeah, Torian, you were shaking your head no, but like what I'm saying is those people aren't being fucking hit. That's why you're not seeing any consequences.
Right, okay, but this is kind of like the same question of like if we went back in time and we actually had like Exxon do the like the stuff that they said that they were going to do. Like I'm trying to even think like now, like okay, I'm just going to snap my fingers and make the legal system work. If I'm going to be trying to change the legal system, I might as well just go actually after companies rather than just go after like a couple of these people who like, yeah, okay, maybe some of the, like a lot of these C-suite people are like horribly terrible people. I'm more of a look at the system and like how people grew and evolved into this kind of place rather than like strictly just blame the individual. So I would rather work on the root problem than maybe like the fruit. So maybe like the people be the fruit and the root would be the corporation, to like take Kobe's thing.
And I'll just concede this right here. The higher you aim to take people out, the less likely you are to take them out. There's going to be blocks and favors and all sorts of bullshit.
Let's go to Doobie, Shadows, and Jack.
So I was originally gonna ask Shadows what he hopes to accomplish with the fines, but I think kind of hit on it. I don't think, and Turing also kind of hit on that. I don't think it really makes sense to just increase the fines because that's not really touching the people at the top. If the company needs to downsize because they're getting hit with massive fines, people at the bottom are going to suffer. So you're not really doing any damage to the people who are actually doing the bad things, right? I think it makes a lot more sense to send those people to prison, to go after them personally, to remove their ability to engage in this kind of business at all. But that's why I think that it makes sense for dissolution to be on the table. And I don't even think it needs to be like even strictly tied to like environmental impact. I think there are plenty of good reasons to take apart a corporation. Right? There's an example that someone brought up earlier. I forget what it was.
The
But
1907 sugar mill.
yes,
Like
porn. But there's actually a more recent example that I think is pretty good of a time a corporation should have been nationalized or dissolved, but wasn't. And it was like 1970 when Ford was producing the Pinto, knowing full well that it was the gas tank was faulty, and they decided not to install a $15 plastic square at the back. So anytime there's a rear collision in that car, it bursts into flames, right? And like almost 30 people died. And they were totally aware of this problem, but they decided that the cost of those lives wasn't worth the cost to manufacture and install that plastic block, right? So there's internal memos of this. They're totally aware of this happening. They got the fine. They paid like I think like $3 million or some shit at the end of the day. For costing the lives of almost 30 people. I think in a situation even like that, there's no massive impact, but the people at the top of this corporation were totally aware that their product was going to be killing people, and they made the decision not to stop that because they were so focused on profits that they were willing to, to fuck everybody else. But so what I think should have happened in that situation is either the company should have been nationalized or taken over by the state, the government, and then dissolved. And there are plenty of companies I think that would have come in and purchased up their assets. Right?
Juby, quick question though,
Sure.
because I want people to realize how powerful this notion is. Okay, because we are talking about like a fundamental shift in relationships between like government and the economics. So basically, like, would you, Doobie, president for a day? What would you do with the porn industry if you were able to nationalize or dissolve any industry that was against, like public good?
Well, I think that so long as we exist in a patriarchy and a capitalistic society, porn is like necessarily a sexually exploitative system. I think that porn is basically rape on film. That if you're taking part of this industry, you're a really shitty person, and if you're supporting this industry, you're a really shitty person, and you should feel bad about it. You, Shadow, shaking your head, you jacking off every night to some woman being raped for money on film is a really bad thing.
Damn, as a sex worker, I didn't know I was getting
it,
raped on film.
No, secondly, if you take part in this industry,
tell me more about how I'm getting raped.
I'm not done. Okay, so if you take part of this industry and you produce porn for money, you are encouraging a patriarchal system that turns women to sex objects, encourages men to see them as sex objects that are meant to be used as meat for pleasure. Right? There are plenty of studies on this. I think it's a really bad thing. That being said, right? So that's what I would do if I was king of the world for a day. That being said,
wait, I really want to know how I'm getting raped.
Unfortunately,
I need you to explain that.
I just told you.
He's saying
no, GSU, how about you explain how I'm getting raped?
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to do.
For my job.
Can we not derail? I know you guys really like touching this porn, but it's not porn right now.
Come on.
Hey.
I was
Come on.
asked the question.
Come on. No, there's no point. Look, let's focus on
Wait, no,
We're
I'm
not
sorry. I'm
getting
just
into
told that I'm
right
getting
now.
raped for my
Yeah,
profession.
no,
Why?
this is the thing. Doobie is saying that women
Why?
should not have the ability to choose to have sex how they want. Like,
Why?
I can hear Silly Serious in chat going off right now. If she's in, like, this is silly, dude. This is absolutely silly.
Counterpoint.
Okay, look,
I mean, I'm
I
a
know you
sex
guys are
worker.
really
I had no
attached-
idea I'd been
Why-
raped.
why
So
did you-
I've already explained how this is the case, right? You are being exploited for your body on film if you participate in the porn industry. That is
Okay.
the truth. I'm sorry to break it to you. And if
Wait,
and if you know,
participate in this
and if you
capitalistic
knowing this,
industry too.
and if you
You're participating in
No,
capitalism
I'm
with
not
me
done.
right
And if you-
now.
and if you-
Are you aiding and raping me?
Okay, hold on. Shut up, everyone. All right. Let it go long enough. We got to move on. We have a little bit more time. I'm gonna get to this. If you want to argue about this thing about porn again, we can. We can do that. But I do want to get through this.
I'm just shocked to learn that I've been getting raped all this time.
I am shocked too, but Counter isn't shocked, which is why he fucking threw that bomb into this. He knows
Can I just
exactly.
I am
really
not
quickly go back to
Doobie,
the point really quickly?
Finish your point.
Okay. So Counter, can you tell me why if you're okay, and it seems I think you were okay earlier with people being put in prison, right? Or targeted, directly. The executives being targeted directly and punished directly for these things. Why are you so against them being stripped out of their positions of power, right? In an official way, having the corporation dissolved, their involvement taken out, and putting someone else in charge, whether it's the state, the state sells off the assets, or in other companies, they're put up for sale by the state, and other companies come in and purchase them, and now we have other people in charge.
Yeah. Trust me, I'm not trying to dodge. If I don't answer your question, feel free to ask it again. Okay. So I am not against the use of force, and I am not against nationalization in all cases, and I'm not against dissolution in all cases. As a matter of fact, I thought Riverboat Jack brought up an extremely prescient point, which was basically like, if global warming is an existential crisis, is that not something akin to a war that would warrant some level of nationalization? That's an important question. I haven't answered that yet. So that might feel weak for me to not answer. But if I knew that 50 years from now, without nationalization, we were literally going to kill fucking billions of people, then I would feel like it was irresponsible for me to lay down on some libertarian principle about how we can never nationalize anything, even if it costs billions of people their lives, right? So it's not the principle. But what I wanted, the reason why I dropped that bomb in the first place, is because I always, whenever it comes to power, whenever it comes to concentrated power, the way I was raised was, if this power was granted to somebody in society, imagine the worst person or your political opponent having that power, and what would they do with it? And no offense, but I kind of figured that you probably had a social conservative take on the porn industry, and we're in a leftist space, which means that a lot of people disagree with you. And I think if you were a dictator for a day, you would use the power that we're talking about to do something that would make a lot of people really upset in an existential way. And that's why I asked the question.
Okay, all right. Well, worst person being Doobie. I don't think that's I'm messing around with everybody. Okay. Let's go to Shadows, Jack, and Clav.
Okay, so I mean that went fucking crazy. Just to clarify, I was shaking my head only at your first claim, Doomy. I actually generally agree with you I generally have a socially conservative view on the porn industry. But even if I was shaking my head on all that, don't get fucking personal with me, okay? Because I will fucking go all in, and I will not regret a single thing I say, okay? Do not get personal with me.
Right, come on.
Okay? Or else I will actually get really fucking angry. But anyways, that's just a general rule for anyone on this panel, by the way. But the thing is, since you were asking about my point on fines, I would like to use an analogy, and I think this will work with what Clav and Connor were saying, because I agree with what you guys are saying about how the fines may not get at them directly. So my thing is, if there's some rich douchebag who's worth $1 million, who's worth $1 million or something, and he's constantly pulling into an illegal parking space at the same place every day, that he just goes to this place, okay, and he keeps getting a $500 fine, he's probably gonna be psh, I'm rich, I had to pay for it. If it keeps being $500 over and over, that's probably not going to stop him. But let's say after the first time, it's not 500 anymore. Now it's 1,000, and then the next time it's 2,000, and then it's 10,000. He's probably going to start fucking caring about, parking in this illegal space. And if that doesn't work, then guess what? Maybe the police are going to have to do something with this car.
No, this is off base. What you're missing is maybe if you took shares, maybe if you began to take ownership, maybe then people are going to care. But if you're just taking money, they're going to find different ways to make money. But if you actually begin to take ownership of their industry or ownership of their business, then maybe they're going to begin to be like, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't do this
Okay, so
anymore.
that's why I
What about
mentioned the
ownership of
car. Oh, hold on, because this is really the last thing I have to say on this topic, and I'm going to get water after. But my thing is, I have a feeling that if it keeps increasing by a certain multitude, they're probably going to care. And maybe, Turing, you could be 100% right. Maybe they'll just keep cutting labor. Maybe they'll just automate labor costs to, continue making a profit. If that's true, then yes, you would have to do something like putting these people in prison, which is why I mentioned you might have to do something with their car if the rich douchebag keeps parking there. Okay, and I yield to the floor. I'm going to go get some water.
Okay, all right,
So-
let's go to Jack and then Clav. Yep.
Sorry, I'm still reeling over the revelation that I've been raped hundreds, if not thousands, of times in my life. The issue with pretty much everything that Shadows said is like, again, going back to one of the points I brought up, there are largely a lot of protections for individuals working on the behalf of corporations, which is why corporations, in effect, can shield individuals. And so we have to prioritize what we want to go after. Do we want to go after the underlying system that is essentially promoting, that's not the word that I want to use, but kind of pushing people to these abuses at the expense of all of us, right? Like, and the issue with what Shadows brought up is that it's not like there's a clear cut, this guy is in a parking space every day illegally. Instead, what happens is, Chevron did a bad, and then there's 10 years of court battle, and then you get a settlement, right? Like, and that leaves a lot of room for people at the company to move around to a different company. Leaves a lot of room for the company to downplay its responsibility. It also leaves a lot of room during that court case for them to continue engaging in bad behavior. And really, at a certain level, what we're trying to do is stop companies from poisoning us and destroying the environment. And so what are good ways to do that? Again, I think dissolution should be on the table, but to Turing News's point, even if we dissolve these companies, the infrastructure and the mechanisms those companies are going to have are still going to exist, and they can still be picked up by another company that might behave in the current system, if nothing is fundamentally changed, in the exact same way. And so all it really ends up being is this complex shell game where people are just jumping around to different companies, moving money around to different companies, declaring bankruptcy to get around court fines, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we really need to do is look at the underlying incentives, and we need to figure out a good way to deal with that infrastructure. And one of those ways can be adopting a different kind of structure that disincentivize predatory private industry, whether that's through democratic worker co-ops or whether that's through nationalization, so you don't have to work at a profit for these companies and you can, in effect, actually work at a loss. Whatever it is, we need to have something in place while we transition to cleaner modes of energy.
Thank you. Clav.
Yeah, so like in the way that you just dismiss the simplicity of the legal system, I think like even a marriage of the two ideas of holding an individual accountable for things, and I don't know how you're going to describe what you just said, nationalizing or whatever it might be. I don't
Changing the
even
underlying incentive structure so that we aren't continuing to poison the planet.
Yeah, so so part of changing the underlying incentive structure is going to be taxing. I think you were talking about carbon taxes earlier, but corporations get around taxes, right? So we wouldn't that doesn't mean that that's not a good solution. That doesn't mean that that isn't going to have some type of impact. And just like you've said throughout the panel, there's more than one thing that you're going to have to do. But I think that if you could argue that you would nationalize a company because you're going to claim that they are an existential threat and a threat to the nation, then if you can do that, then surely you could cite the same reasoning to remove the people responsible for that and imprison them or try them for some type of war crime or whatever it is that you're trying to connect that to. So I don't know why you would be if you are citing that as reasoning that you could institute such control over a company. I don't see why you would also dismiss the idea that the individuals could be held responsible.
Well, just real quick, I don't necessarily care that much about feeling good about throwing these people in prison. What I care about is saving the planet. So I'm prioritizing the one, and I don't care as much about the other, even if they do deserve copious amounts of imprisonment.
About the individual part, because it's this is a really difficult part of the conversation. So let's say that there are 100,000 workers that work for BP. Okay, and there's just an oilman who's working on a rig outside of Houston somewhere. Do I think that that person should be thrown in jail for pumping oil out to get money for their family to put food on the table and so forth? No. So even when you're just trying to determine who is the actual specific individual actor inside of these huge mega conglomerate corporations that we should levy, all of the layers of the law down against. Okay, yes, board of directors probably. Okay, yes, C-suite members. Yeah, maybe even them too. But I'm kind of just and here I am being the apologist for people that are working in big oil and so forth. However, you've got so many people in the United States backed into a corner where they need to get some type of income because of their material conditions to support their family, that I can't even come down on every single person working in the coal. I drove through West Virginia. I talked to Freems. I've seen the abandoned coal mine towns. I'm from abandoned coal mining towns. I can't completely just put all of the impetus on that individual who's just trying to survive. That's what I want to say to you, Covictus, a little bit.
Yeah, and that's why, to my idea that I presented earlier, I don't think that you would have to shut down a company and put those people out. And I don't think that the threshold has to I'm not going to sit here and draw a line exactly on where responsibility is going to be. I'm not going to propose legislation right now. I'm not going to write legislation on a panel, right? It's just the idea, because we're all talking very generally about it. It's the idea of where I think that the people at the top are way beyond the threshold, or of where we would all agree that they are responsible for the acts that are hurting people and therefore should be held responsible for that. The mechanisms through that, or I guess what I was trying to argue with my last comment though, was just that the dismissal of that, I don't think there's much of a place to just dismiss that idea, because I do think that that's really important, that those people not be allowed to move somewhere else and then repeat the same shit again somewhere else, because then you just have to keep nationalizing everything over. It just seems endless. That doesn't seem like solves the problem.
Well, if your goal isn't to solve the problem and just to push the ideology, then you might be okay with that, though. Right?
Why?
I'm just saying.
Gambit, I think that you would agree that I would be a person not trying to push an ideology that still is pushing for nationalization of certain industries. So you can.
But we're not. We're pushing for nationalization of this general rule, not certain industries, right? We're saying people that.
I mean, I'm going to be able to argue.
These things.
You asked me a question, I'll answer it. You asked me a question, I'll answer it. I'm going to be able to argue over a long enough period of time. All we need is probably 30 minutes, actually, that most, if not all, oil companies should be at some point dissolved. We'll go your dissolved route, and we can deal with the ownership aspect of it later. But there have been decades of misinformation given. There have been decades of climate anti-science funded. There have been decades of corporate abuses. You can look at the internal investigation or the undercover investigation that was just done, where the ExxonMobil oil executives came out and spoke about, we're supporting carbon taxes right now because we think that it's going to give us some good publicity, but nothing's going to come from it. So I mean, I think that we can mostly go through the entire oil.
But you agree that damage to the environment is larger than just the oil industry, right?
I would, but let's start at the source.
So wait. I just want to walk you through this really quick, because I think you were missing.
We tried to walk you through years before, and you didn't know who was going to own it when it was dissolved. You're just going to let the
I didn't. I answered all of your questions. You just didn't like my answer.
But then you're not. Okay,
Which question did I answer? Let's go back through it. Which question did I answer?
then you're just going to allow the people that owned the company to get all the profit from the company as it gets sold off. And like, how is that going to work out? So you're just
Well, I
converting
said
their
we
money.
would fine them as well. The fine could be in respect to the money that they would make.
Can the fine be the entire sale? Because then I'll probably agree with you. Can the fine be you get zero? All of the sale of the entire company goes to the state. That's the fine. Dissolve it, sell it.
Wait,
all of
so
the money goes.
can I
all of the money
so
goes to
I don't
can I ask you a
necessarily
question?
think
Why
that's
would
reasonable,
you why would you
but I
punish
don't.
why would you punish a company for supporting carbon taxes if if that's what the
I'm
major
not saying
political parties are
I'm just
pushing?
saying that it
No, no.
doesn't exactly. I'm just saying it's
Okay,
not
so I
exactly
think
they're
I
part of
answered your
the
question.
business.
Can you answer mine? Right.
Okay, yeah.
The percentage, me and you could sit together and do math and maybe agree on a number. Maybe that number's not 100%. I don't know what that number is. I don't think the number matters that much in context for this conversation. But what I was asking you is, you agreed that this issue is bigger than the oil industry, and you're applying a rule that you think applies to the oil industry broadly to any company continuously or
I'm one of the people that
repeatedly.
thinks that I miscalculated in all of my climate projections that only climate refugees from the United States were going to come from the East Coast. I'm on Connor's position that I'm driving across the country. I'm looking at water tables. I'm seeing where we're growing our food. I think that we're coming into an existential crisis even faster than I usually let on in my doomer streams. So yeah, I think that we're going into an entire new realm where we have sand shortages. We have different building material shortages. We've got infrastructure problems. We've got electrical grid problems. We've got distribution of energy systems problems. We've got
And you think
hydroelectric dam problems.
you think
So
the
we're
solution
coming.
for
All
all
that
of
I'm
those
saying,
industries is
I don't know what
nationalized?
I don't know what the solution for every single industry is, but all that I'm telling people is like, we thought that things were bad before. They're getting worse than they are, and we're going into new ownership structures, and we need to go to new nonprofit ownership structures. I think that there is space between nationalization and nonprofit ownership, and space between a corporate governance structure and a nationalized governance structure. So I think that we need to develop new language, new terms, new working structures, new nonprofit structures to fill this void that we're talking about, because we don't want it to be completely nationally owned, but we can't have it be for-profit run. So we've
But
got to
you
build some
agree
new,
Why
that
can't it be a for-profit
you
run?
wait. Oh,
because then
I
you're
just
just going to
want.
continue
But
extracting like
no,
resources and profits out
that's
of
a
like
silly
things that you
question.
mine out of the
No,
ground,
no.
and it's going to continue to happen
You
forever.
agree that even if we nationalize, even if we co-op, these companies need capital to run, right? Unless you
Yeah, of
plan
course.
to endlessly support them financially, no matter what the outcomes are, right?
Yeah, but you
So
can have them,
there's-
but you can have their governance structure be written in with like salary caps for people. So you're not going to have the C-suite making like 1,000 times the amount that labor would be making. You're not going to have dividend payments going off. So you're going to be able to like
You can
bring
also
all of this
operate them
capital
at
back into the
cost
business.
instead of at a
Wait,
profit.
Turing, are you like communist adjacent at all?
I don't know if it exactly matters. I just want people to have water at the moment right
Well, it
now.
does matter because I want to know how seriously to take it. Because you said that because these things are coming out of, you said you're gonna have people profiting off things that are coming off out of the ground, and it's going to lead to more and more whatever. But I mean, that's an argument for like nationalizing food industries and mining industries, all mining industries, and the oil industry in
There's a
general,
difference.
right?
There's a difference.
And
There's a
cars,
difference.
right? Nationalize the auto industry, the entire fucking auto industry. Like
Now,
I'm
you see
just
why I
wondering
asked
like
the question,
how
Gigi.
how seriously to take.
Okay. We can answer that question if you want, then I'll
Yeah,
go Connor.
it's a fair question. We're going to have to reevaluate basically every structure for resources, for transportation, for energy, for water, for food production. Nobody is making profit the way I've gone to 40 different farms on this trip. The farmers aren't making money because it's all just being taken by the middlemen. So do I want every single thing to be nationalized overnight? No, because I don't want just like this government tyranny monopoly to like take care of everything. This is why I'm trying to continuously say I want to develop some kind of structure in between a nonprofit, in between a co-op, and in between a nationalized business to exist in this space. So it's everybody gets a little bit of piece of the pie. Do I have that exact perfect answer yet? Not yet, but we've got to work towards it.
Okay, counter. And then Kobe.
Muted.
Just absolutely.
All right. Well, I hope you at least heard my motherfucker through the mute. Okay.
Yes, indeed.
So
He felt it in spirit. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Cool. So the reason why I wanted to jump in here kind of aggressively is because like I think that this is what's actually going to happen. Capitalists such as myself and GSU Gambit and maybe Shadows a little bit, we're going to argue that maybe it's not as bad as people project. Basically, here's all the models that we don't think are going to, Shadows, you don't have to jump in with me if you don't want to. But basically, the way to solve the climate crisis is by changing the infrastructure as it exists now, investing in nuclear energy, investing in renewables, investing in quick turn natural gas turbine engines, basically trying to culturally encourage people to switch over to EVs instead of CO2, investing in lab meat because a shitload of CO2 emissions and methane greenhouse gas emissions are from agriculture, and a lot of the greenhouse gas emissions in agriculture are from meat. And basically, like, I'm not eating the bugs and I'm not moving to a pod. Okay, that's not fucking happening. I'm gonna buy an electric truck. I'm gonna get some solar panels on my fucking roof, and I'm gonna eat lab meat. That's what I'm willing to do in order to save the environment. And if I have to, basically survive climate catastrophe in order to do that, then we will. But here's the thing that I wanted to do an olive branch for, because Demon Mom and I had this conversation again. Libertarians and anarchists actually have a decent amount of overlap when it comes to self-reliance, creating parallel structures to the government, creating parallel social structures that allow people to survive. And you could basically do that with food distribution. Touring News brought up like vertical farming and also making these things open source. Chances are we're going to need to do that if the projections are as bad as Touring News is saying, just because we're not going to be able to predict what land is going to be arable in 30 years. And on top of that, it might change every 5 to 10 years, where one time we were getting kick-ass crops out of this part of the country, but because of like some ecological disaster, we can no longer get food out of this part of the country. So now we have to rely on this part of the country. And basically, we either need to protect the farms from the environment. That way they're not being destroyed by hurricanes, tornadoes, or droughts, or we need to basically be flexible and have open source food. And if logistic networks are breaking down because I'm buying into Touring News' black pilled scenario, then guess what? Arguing over who's in control of the fucking shit show is the least of your concerns. The most things that you need to be concerned with is food, shelter, security. And those are the three things that you're going to need to be concerned with in this scenario.
Okay, let's Kobe, and we'll move on to our next topic after that. We're running out of time.
I've been enjoying. I've been enjoying the conversation. I've been a little quiet. I just gotta say, it seems like a system that is like a mix between like a market economy, a worker ownership economy, and a nationalized economy. It's like a social democracy. And I'm just gotta say, we got around to it. We all became sock dem pilled. We don't got too far on either side. We can have a little bit of both. We have a little bit of macaroni salad, a little bit of potato salad. That's all I gotta say.
Okay, right.
Can I real quick just respond to Connor?
Very quickly.
Okay. I agree with everything you said. My worry is that private industry is not going to get us there fast enough or efficiently enough before the shit really hits the fan. And the underlying concern of food, shelter, security, those are going to be very, very, very compelling things for any kind of rise of fascism in our society. And so I want to get us to a point where we are not in like desperate circumstances, so that we don't all fall under some authoritarian despot for the next 100 years. Okay?
And that seems like a good idea.
Okay, but my encouragement would be to the people who are literally watching this shit at home is that basically you have to be ready for two things based off of the perspectives in this panel: ecological catastrophe and authoritarian governments in response to ecological catastrophe, whether that's well intended from the left or nefariously intended from the right. So basically what I'm telling you is you need to be self-reliant, figure out your own food, figure out your own physical security, build. One of the things we were talking about is basically building community connections, community gardens, community organization, radios, telecom. I hate to say it, but guns. And this might seem like very libertarian preppy to me, but what was interesting listening to Demon Mama talk about like communal social activism was how much of a perspective overlap there is between like libertarian prepper society and anarchists. And I think that's really interesting, actually.
They're all fucking idiots.
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Everybody buy
we
freeze-dried
need to
cabbage and fucking macaroni.
Yeah.
Right? Do that
We
now.
need to do everything we can to avoid the rise of eco-fascism, because it's coming.
So all I'm going to say is that libertarians and anarchists are wrong for a very similar reason. They assume this idea that Connor is projecting, that like, well, actually, we're going to go back to this like, this like sort of like pre-lapsarian era, this like prelapsarian era where we are like back to the land. No, I would argue Connor, you're with me. You're Great Courses Plus pilled. You know that the great arc of history is ever increasing complexity and ever right. And I don't think that the system projecting here is goes along with that. But hey, okay, maybe this is like a bias of mine. But
history. Hold on. Sorry, quick address. You also know that.
Thanks. Great. So, you guys are gonna start a different argument, so I'm moving on. All right. And if you want, you can continue in the open panel. It's always a place to do that. All right.
Do we get closing statements?
No, we don't get closing statements. We move on. That's just gonna take too long.
Oh, damn.
Yeah. So, to my audience, we're gonna continue on to the second topic. But if you are enjoying this conversation so far, hit that follow button right now. Make sure notification is on, so you know I'm going live. I do it 6 days a week. We have these conversations, and they're a lot of fun. Which just I want to remind everyone that at the beginning of this, Doobie told us he was a nice guy. Just want to make sure that we don't.
He's a nice guy.
I
think he's nice.
I've actually been very nice, you guys. I was very tempted to say mean things to Shadows after he went on that little rant, because it would have been really fucking funny. Right, so I've been very nice this guy.
Okay. All
Sounds
right.
like his threat worked.
Okay. All right. So, moving on. Boy. Topic 2. Which I don't have fun. All right, topic 2. The rich have always had special services that have catered to their needs. If they can pay for something, they'll have it. This includes having private emergency responders. But should that be the case? Should the rich have the ability to access private services such as the police or firefighters, or should they be forced to use the public systems like everyone else? Do these private services give the rich the ability to safely disinvest from public systems? So we've had some arguments in the past, and I know it's going to come up here soon. But yeah, what got me thinking about this was I'll put the topic in chat. What got me thinking about this was a story about I believe it was either Beyonce and Jay-Z, or it was Kim Kardashian and Kanye West, and I forget which one. But anyway, we had one of those wildfires last year or the year before, right? And it was encroaching on whatever land that one of their massive mansions was on. And they hired a private firefighting service, because they have those apparently, to protect their house, which I thought was really interesting. I thought to myself, like, well, that's a class of people who could literally just check out of the public system and not ever have to worry about it, right? So, like, is this something we want to allow? This and the firefighting and other services as well. Is that something we want to allow? So let's start with GSU Gambit for introductions. Oh wow! Just like Connor, so beautiful, so eloquent.
I haven't even been able to talk to my stream. They haven't even heard me. Jesus, my mic was muted, not my Discord. Yeah. So, wow. I'm sorry, but yeah. So, I work so hard because there are a lot of people with bad ideas, unfortunately, and I want to always be able to have capital to invest in private businesses that I think are doing things the way that they should be done. The idea that we should bar people from using their capital to have preferential treatment in whatever way, as long as it's not, well, destructive is such a malleable word, but as long as it's not destructive to others, I think it's fine. But yeah, I'm generally in favor of private ownership of things, and I think that just like the situation where you said, where if the local fire department is not good enough to protect your house, you should be able to hire your own firefighters. Blah blah blah. So I'm heavily in favor of being able to use capital for preferential treatment, probably in any system that you're going to think to name, whether it's education, healthcare, or blah blah blah. I'm pretty sure we'll get into this in the open though.
Thank you, Jack.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. You should not be able to opt out of the public systems. And I think that by allowing people to have private police forces, private firefighting forces, private schools, we largely allow them to essentially take a position that is anti-taxation for those things, lowering their own tax burden, which causes the rest of society to suffer, so that they can have their special little police force with their special little badges, or their special fire department that is only for them in their own house. Let the entire rest of the neighborhood burn down, as long as you're protecting my house. You know, like, we used to have private fire departments. Like, that private fire departments is like the history of fire departments. And it turns out that's just not a good way to distribute like firefighting in general. And so we decided as a country to have a essentially a nationalized fire department for our government. And I think that that has largely worked fairly well. It's just that rich people should not be able to dictate where the fire department goes. I think the fire department should go where it needs to go to help the most amount of people. And by de-investing in that system, by allowing private firefighting, we essentially put everyone else in more danger for the benefit of a few rich people.
Okay, thank you. Let's go to Connor.
All right, motherfucker test. Could you hear that, motherfucker?
Yes.
All right, cool. So I'm gonna take a different perspective, which is basically Riverboat Jack kind of brought up like de-investment. That would not be my perspective on private firefighting or private security. What my thing would be is like, you have to, as a rich person, poor person, middle class person, doesn't matter, you have to contribute to a minimum amount of social services, like good quality public education, good quality law enforcement, good quality fire, good quality EMTs. I think EMTs should be municipal or county organizations. I think the fact that they're run for profit is fucking weird. And you should have to contribute to that system as much as anybody else in relation to your income. However, if you want to hire your private shit on top of that after you've paid your taxes, I do not give a fuck. That is totally fine. And I'll leave it there.
Shadows.
So yeah, I probably have the exact same position as that. You know, as long as people pay their taxes and aren't paying lawyers a shit ton to skirt their taxes, I'm fine with private services. Something I've actually noticed is I've been researching healthcare a lot for the past week or so, because I'm actually debating a libertarian TikToker on healthcare on Wednesday on Politically Provoked, which is why you should follow me if you want to see me yell at an ANCAP. Yeah, I've been learning about this, and one of the main drawbacks of other modernized countries and their much better healthcare system is really the waiting lines. In some countries like Germany and France, there's a very high bar to have to buy out of the system in terms of income. And so for certain procedures, they just have to wait a really long time. And that seems to be the main drawback of these systems. While I'm still in favor of them, if someone who's rich wants to pay for a different private service to get something faster, whether or not that's in the healthcare industry, I'm totally fine with that.
Thank you. Kobe.
Yeah, I'm kind of, I'm actually not sure where I stand on this. One thing I find kind of interesting is like a lot of Enlightenment thinking is associated with this idea of like private property, and it is true that like that was a big element of it. But actually, a lot of Enlightenment thinkers and a lot of like thinkers that have historically been interested in liberty have actually been very critical of private property. I think that's what we're getting at here, which is that private property can allow a society to segment itself and people to kind of decide what system they're a part of. It's a way, that some authors have argued that the aristocracy is allowed to keep itself, from other ages in history. And I think that there's a good argument there. I'm really skeptical skeptical of the idea of a private police force, a private firefighters, a little less of like private security. I don't really know how, I mean, I kind of technically work a security guard job. I don't really know if I'm a massive threat to society.
I think you are. I've been saying this for a long time.
Well, maybe you could argue we can finally stop the menace of Kobe. But yeah, what I would wonder is perhaps some discussions of like how we would regulate this, because what I would argue, what I would think, and maybe this is just, again, like maybe this is my bias, would be, well, maybe just like wealth redistribution. Just as, if we have less wealthy people that have the ability to do this kind of stuff, they're not going to be able to do it. But I would also, I don't know, maybe that's not enough, and maybe we need to actually outright deal with this. I haven't investigated it too much, and so I'd be interested to hear what people's positions is. I have to step away for like 2 seconds, but I can hear everybody.
Clav.
Yeah, so I agree with the people who are talking about, or that are okay with this. My perspective on this, though, or my reasoning behind this, is that I think the less people who are putting strain on public systems that don't need to put strain on public systems is probably better for everybody. So, for instance, if I live in whatever school district I live in, I pay taxes. I still pay taxes in that school district regardless. And then I send my kids to a private school. Well, that's one less kid, one less load, one less person for the teacher to have to keep track of, blah, 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 more attention for the other students, et cetera, et cetera. That's less strain on the system. I still paid my taxes, and I didn't pull resources from it. Same thing with firefighting and so on and so forth. I can keep that pretty short, I think.
Okay. All right. We're going to have interesting disagreements. I love it. All right. Next. Troy.
Yeah, I've been concerned about coming into this topic because I think that I'm gonna create a straw man, and I want some people to kind of like help me out of this one because I have maybe a slightly different take than people thought I was going to. If I'm investigating this, I guess my question comes down to like, what is private security versus what is private police? Let's say that I was investigating like the state, or I was investigating like a corporation, or just a journalist is doing like some kind of investigation work. The one person that comes to mind a lot was I know Glenn Greenwald always had security down in Brazil when he was doing a lot of corruption investigation and so forth. So are we going, I guess I'm building the straw man of, can people have security forces if they consider themselves to be doing a job that could be antagonistic to corporate interests or to public interests? Because I think that there's actually like wiggle room for private security to be kind of like useful, even if it's just like a person monitoring you or so forth. So I'm really picking like a niche part of the conversation to get into. And I'm concerned about even what I said there, but I'm going to stop and then let's see where that would go in the main part.
Okay, JB.
I think my position is just like entirely reliant on what we mean by like opting out, right? Do you mean that they can have like private security on their property somewhere, and they have like the private firefighter department they can call to deal with their shit, and that means they don't need to pay into the system anymore? Because if that's the case, then I'm against it. I think they should be forced to pay into the system regardless. But if I piss off Shadows and he's lurking outside my window or something, right? I want to be able to call maybe like a security guard to come in and do like a citizen's arrest, right? I think that's fine. I think so long as they're not opting out of this. I think so long as they're not opting out of the system, no longer paying taxes into the system, I don't really care if they have a private fire department or whatever the fuck.
Okay, open to the panel.
So
Yeah, I actually
disagree.
I wanted to follow up.
So we can get rid of this straw
and then
man.
Shadow. Okay.
Yeah, because we need to get rid of this straw man. If like me, Doobie, and Connor said, I think if somebody's paying their taxes into the system, and they're using excess income in a different place, you do agree that that person is not taking from the system, correct? I think Clavicus said it too. Clavicus.
That was me, yeah.
Or is your take, if all of your income for some resource is not going into the system, then you're taking from the system? Like, what's your actual take?
It can be taken from the system, because if you're opting into the private healthcare industry rather than going through the public industry, and you're trying to just like continue with the for-profit motive of health insurance, like you still theoretically would be taking money out of the public services and trying to create like a market to compete against it. That would be going for profit. So like on a technical sense, like you're still, even by like existing outside
you're
the system
competing
by
with it.
providing. Right. So my answer is kind of a yes.
But we do want wait.
Yeah,
but
healthcare is a
wait,
good example of that. That's fair, but a lot of other
no,
public
it's
systems
not.
are just
Not.
just funded through taxing, though.
No, it's not. This is why. So let's say there's an inefficient system, and I
Well,
want to
it
create a
is that way
system
because
that's
then you're taking people that would be in the public sector and they're going into the private sector to work because they're going to be able to make more money. So, like, okay, if we're allowing people to have a private police force system, and private police are going to be getting $100,000 per year, but public police are going to be getting $60,000 per year, then yeah, you are like shifting the way, like you're not going to be having the same amount of like human resources going
I
into the
disagree
policing
with
system.
that. I think that's a
But
good
you
example.
can't
so you
because it
so capitalism
sounds
is
financial.
inherently evil, right? Everything is nationalized. What does this take?
I
How
gave
does
the
so with the police thing? If I hire public or I hire private police, if instead I didn't hire the private police, that doesn't mean that the public police force then gets paid more.
Yeah. Well,
So,
hold on. Can I?
sorry,
Can I?
Wait, so can I jump in? 'Cause I was gonna jump in after.
I was gonna say your name. So, all right.
Okay.
Shadow,
Sorry.
Jack, counter. Go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah, so to respond to what touring news is saying when it comes to healthcare, like, yeah, it's generally true that, if you do have a private for-profit system, you do create some form of competition. In in Germany, I know it's like only like 17% of the population is covered by private healthcare. So, it depends on what that bar is. But there's also the issue in some systems where you don't have that case, like in Canada, that uses universal single payer for insuring. You would not be able to pay for private service, but there's the option in some cases to pay to cut the line. There's actually a case in this in Quebec where the guy wanted to get private supplemental insurance to help get access faster, and they said, no, you can't do that, and they ruled that it was actually against Quebec's Charter of Human Rights. You can look up Chaoulli versus Quebec. It's CHAOULLI versus Quebec. I don't remember all the details, but I believe I'm getting the correct gist. So that's with healthcare, but I think we can all agree that healthcare is a much more complicated issue than, say, like, private security, private police, or like the fire department. I think we can all agree on that much. So I think it's a little different when someone has private security. And you mentioned something, Torian, actually, when it comes to private security, is the question of some business sometimes like to hire a security. Like, I know at the grocery store I work at, we hire police, but they work at police departments. Like, should businesses have to? I wanted to follow up with, should businesses have to hire people who work at police departments, or should they be able to contract a private security organization like they do in, say, San Francisco?
Can I? Yeah. So.
Okay.
Sorry.
So it's
I just thought that was interesting.
Well, it's Shadow, Jack, and counter.
Oh, wait.
Okay.
Yeah, I want to hear from Jack because I need to learn.
So, I mean, that there are a lot of people brought up a lot of points, and I just kind of want to talk about them a little bit. First of all, like, the issue of private firefighters is one of distribution of services. We benefit from having a centralized kind of firefighting force that can distribute resources equally, rather than clumped up individualist firefighting services. Additionally, when we talk about private policing, one of the things we need to realize is it's not just like, oh, a rich person has private security. No, it's actually like police departments contract with private security firms to do things that police officers do, like patrol given areas or do different jobs that police would otherwise do. And that's a problem because contracted private police don't have the same kind of regulation on their services that police officers do. And when we're talking about, like, well, it's fine if you send your kid to a private school or have a private police force because you're paying into the system, that might be true right now, but largely what has happened, and you can look at this historically, is that the rich tend to rely on these privatized systems and then lobby the government to charge less in taxes because they don't need the services of firefighters or police to protect their property, or public schooling, because they send their kids to private school. They have a private security force. They have a private firefighting force. So why should they pay as much taxes? And that's something that we see time and time again. And I think it really coalesces around the issue of like private schools. And historically, you need to go back and look at the reason we have private schools. And a really good place of kind of learning about that is in the South. The South during Reconstruction largely had this move towards public education because emancipated Black people wanted to get educated. They wanted to educate their children and allow them to have experience true freedom in society. And white people largely sent their kids to private schools because they didn't want their white kids associating with Black kids. And then when public education became universal, integration started happening, and oops, not cool with that. And so white people, again, sent their kids to private school. And this is around like the 1950s. That's when you start seeing the push for tax vouchers for private schools being used as a cudgel to effectively eliminate public schools. In fact, you can find multiple examples of this in the South where private voucher programs were used to effectively destroy the public education system to get rid of public schools, so that the only schools in the area that you could go to were private schools that were too expensive for Black folks to go to. So when we're talking about this, it's not just that like it's not just like hypothetical. We have real world examples of this happening, and it is something that persists today. For example, the way schools are funded is through property taxes. And one of the reasons schools are funded through property taxes is because rich white areas tend to be able to fund their schools a lot better than predominantly African American areas in inner cities. The property taxes are lower. And so when we look at this, there are disparate outcomes, and a lot of it comes from the fact that people who live in the city, who can afford to send their kids to private school, often do. And this has then led to a renewed push for tax vouchers for private schools. Because people aren't just content paying their share into society to fully fund those private programs, they want tax money to go to their own too, even if they're at a private institution. So when we're talking about this, it is something that erodes public institutions, and we need to keep that in mind, especially if we at all care about the well-being of all people in our society and not just the rich people.
Rich people don't want to pay taxes in either case. It doesn't matter. Yeah, it doesn't matter if they're using the roads that everybody uses. They don't want their taxes to go up in either case, and they'll fight it tooth and nail. So
which is why we need to tell them to go fuck. But that's why we need to tell them to go fuck themselves. Because no offense, here's my thing. I hate the labor theory of value. I think it's like an economically nonsensical fucking perspective. But there's something that's true to it, which is basically social institutions and economic institutions don't function without the workers that power them. That's fucking true about the labor theory of value. And I see that for fucking rich people. You wouldn't be fucking rich if you didn't have thousands of people working for you who basically created that wealth in order for you to be rich. So sorry,
it's almost like labor created the value.
Well, yeah, but it gets down to like, if I spend 16 hours on a fucking mud pie, then that mud pie is now worth fucking $300. Like, nah.
No.
So, anyways,
the labor theory of value has nothing to do with price. We can talk about that later.
I'll read theory later. Anyways, so the point being that basically, like, at this point, we just need to say, hey, you want to do private shit? That's fucking cool, but you have to share the fair share of expense. We live in a society. Sorry. And then I wanted to kind of get into some nitty gritty here. So I just kind of wanted to push back against the concept of centralized firefighting. I don't think that's necessarily true. I don't think there's any like federal firefighters. There's county and municipal firefighting, and it's divided up the same way that like police departments are divided up between county and city resources. So it is kind of
I might have misspoke on that.
No, it's totally fine, because the thing that is universal is standards. There are standards that most firefighters are held to, that most police departments who are accredited are held to, and they do vary by state to state, like all that kind of bullshit. But at the same time, there is like a best practices that is put out at a national level that if you're not adhering to, oftentimes you're viewed as behind the times, and it can basically get you sued ultimately. When it comes to private policing, I wanted to parse out a definition, because private policing to me does not mean law enforcement officers who work for a municipality or for a county renting out their services for an off-duty job. That is not what I think of. When I think of private policing, what I'm thinking of is there's like a cattle ranch in Texas that I want to say is like the size of Rhode Island or some shit like that. It's owned by like one family, and they have their own police department that is basically, and the land is private. It is fucking private. So the reason why I think that's fucked up is because basically at that point, that private police department probably acts like the fucking mob of that rich family. And if that rich family wants to, like do cocaine, bang hookers, and fucking murder people and throw them in the backyard, chances are the cops are like, well, you pay me $100,000 a year, sir. Where do you want to hide the bodies? And that's kind of like the problem with private police departments. Police departments need to be able to hold every member of the community accountable, which is nice when you're a public employee. One of my supervisors, I love him. He's my personal fucking hero. The deputy chief's son was doing 110 in a 55 on a country road in the middle of the night. And then the fucking deputy chief's son said, "Do you know who my dad is?" And the fucking cop said, "I don't give a fuck." And he gave him a ticket anyways, because he's a cop. And cops enforce the fucking law, and it doesn't matter who you are. And we have conversations okay, hold on. I get it that you fucking dealt with some fucking pussy ass cops that didn't do their fucking jobs. But the best part of being a law enforcement officer is somebody telling you, I'm a powerful lawyer. I'm a powerful doctor. I make $300,000. I pay your salary. And you say, you know what, sir? You were doing fucking 80 and a 55. Here's your fucking $265 ticket. You have a nice day. And that's one of the best fucking feelings in the world. So no, power should hold power accountable.
Can I just add one thing real quick to your statement about private policing? Nevada just this year has been floating a bill that would allow tech companies to essentially buy their own towns, where they would have full control over the local government, including like local police departments. That would be an example of a privatized police force in total, with the full force law, I might add.
That's fucking insane.
Can you send me?
I don't know if that works quite that way.
Jack, could you please send me an article on that? I would love to read that. And
here you go.
And Just the Shadows, if you could also send me that thing about that Canadian individual you mentioned before, when you have a time. But go ahead, sure. Shadows, go ahead.
I was gonna say, isn't that the premise of Schitt's Creek? Isn't that like supposed to be about our privately owned town? I don't know much about the show, just that my parents watch it. My dad will like always start hyena laughing like 5 different times.
It's actually really funny. Your dad has good taste. It's a really funny show.
It's a pretty good show. I mean, he does, but he always laughs like a hyena, so I don't like it when my parents watch comedies. But anyways, that aside, so I don't know how that would work, but that's definitely interesting. So I hope you put that in the group chat, Riverboat.
I did.
Oh, sweet. But yeah, that I was gonna say what Connor was thinking of, like when he thinks of private police force. I was thinking that, but more for like gated communities. Like there's a whole stereotype of like rich liberal gated communities. And that's usually what I think of when I think of a privatized police force. It's like you have a shit ton of rich people in this area, which I think is really the issue when it comes to like private police forces and fire departments. There's the issue of accountability, but there is also the thing is there's a very limited market for it, and it would only be able to be established in certain areas. Like maybe like the only area of Chicago where I think that would ever work is like maybe the North Shore.
I'm really concerned I'm just being the shitty person on the panel, but am I actually becoming like a devil's advocate? Okay, so let's say that I'm a very rich person, okay? And now private policing and private security is banned in the country. I'm gonna hire some landscapers and I'm just gonna give them guns and I'm gonna say, oh, they're my landscaping crew. Like they're not my actual private police, they're not my actual private security.
Well,
so like I'm just really trying to think of like how is it that we can actually get this done?
Well,
That's a
But I don't think anybody here has established a reason to get this done. But before we
Yeah,
get
so
into
that's what I
that
wanted
point,
to address.
really quickly,
Yeah.
so just about everything River Jack said about the education system and the funding was BS. You guys can look this up. The education.
No, don't even try to.
Okay, no, listen.
No,
Public funding
we
of
had
public
to-
public fund. Okay,
Look.
calm yourself. Public funding of education.
Calm
Calm yourself. Control your
Come on,
impulses.
come on.
Public funding of education has actually increased for the last 30 years across the board, federal, state, and local level. Right. The issue is that a lot of it is being eaten up in administrative bloat. Right. It's not that the schools aren't getting money. It's that the money is going to the education system and then it's being eaten up by staff and whatever the fuck. Right. So it's not actually getting to the children.
It just happens that
That
inner
has
city schools are underfunded
okay,
compared to their
that's not true. That isn't even true. Look it up. That's
Why
not
have
true.
class sizes
Wait,
gone
hold
up?
on.
Literally Google this before you say it, please.
Wait, hold on. They're both
stop.
right, actually.
Please, wait.
Can
Please,
I-
can I just
Can we listen?
Yeah.
So this isn't really an issue with evil rich people, and there are very few of these evil rich people, by the way, lobbying the government that is democratically elected, in places where there are far more poor people that have kids going to school than there are rich people sending kids to private school. Right? It's not really an issue with them lobbying the government to have schools defunded because they're not getting defunded. Right? So that's just BS. Right? So
that is historically true.
I don't think
all of our time.
Hey, it's not historically true. Google it.
You can
Literally
look it up.
Google it right now. Look up defunding of the education system in the last 30 years. You're going to find a ton of corrections.
Zip code.
You're going to find a ton of corrections from the Washington Post. You're going to find corrections from the Washington Post.
Whoa. Doobie, finish your point. Then we can all respond. We have time to respond.
Why do we let people make
this is a myth.
unsalient and untrue?
Can you just control yourself for 2 seconds? This is a myth that is promoted by. Okay, this is a myth that's promoted by silly Democrats who want a virtue signal. Right. The truth is, all these things have been increasing funding since like the 70s. Right. Literally, Google it. You'll find tons of articles about the defunding of the education system, and all these articles have corrections because they're wrong.
Okay. All right. So you can. Shadows wants to add something to that, and then we're going to go to Jack and Troy, and if he has something on that.
Yeah, so I'm not too sure on K through 12, but it is true that a lot of funding has increased for like not secondary but university level education, and it is eaten up by administrative bloat. This is true. The two main reasons for why college has increased is one, administrative bloat, and two, the program that the government set up. So it is true that there's been a bunch of administrative bloat at the college level. There's no doubt about that, especially since the early 2000s. This is when it really started. However, we put a disproportionate amount of federal and state funds into our universities and colleges. So a lot of that is why that at the federal and state level, it's increasing, but it's eaten up by administrative. My understanding is that for K through 12, we have not had that sort of increase, and that it's because of that disproportionate amount of funding to that higher level of education.
Jack.
Everything that Doobie said is just factually incorrect. You can look it up. There are numerous sources backing up everything that I said. Historically, tax vouchers for private schools have been used as cudgels to destroy public education systems, and explicitly for racial reasons, I might add, to make sure that white kids don't mingle with black kids. So when we look up the history of it, that's literally that's it. You can look it up. It's part of the history of Reconstruction. It's part of the history of the early 1900s. And even to this day, there are studies coming out showing the disparities between funding between inner city schools and rural schools and also suburban schools. So you can look at all of that. The funding might have been going up, but guess what? It's not going up enough. So I don't know what Doobie's talking about other than passing off bullshit.
Well, like I said, you
in
should have
this
Googled
chat.
that before you said it. Just literally Google. I put it in the chat
Guess
for
what?
you.
Guess what?
That is
You
from
should
the
Google the
Washington
things you
Post.
say too.
That is from the Washington Post, a very well-established journalistic organization that I'm sure you all appreciate. They admit right in their headline that they were incorrect, that actually funding has increased, and it is being eaten up at the K through 12 level too by administrative.
Is it enough
I don't
to
know about
account
that.
for the
No,
outcomes of
it's-
children? No,
Okay,
it's not.
But that is not what you said earlier, right? What you said was that they were
I
being
said they're
defunded.
disproportionately
You said
funded
that they
based
were
on property
being.
taxes.
You said that they were being defunded because rich people don't want to send their
Yeah,
kids to
no,
school with black
that
people.
is what
That
tax
is not
vouchers
the truth.
do.
That is not the
Historically,
truth.
do be.
That is
That is
total
what
bullshit.
tax vouchers to funnel public money into private schools do.
Okay.
Is
all
You
right.
can look
Is-
that up.
Okay. Okay. So
I don't know why you're spending this time lying on this panel,
Okay.
Doobie.
You can check the group chat. You'll find in there that
So-
everything you said is incorrect. I'm sorry to tell you.
So Turing.
I mean, you can check Google and find
Yeah.
So
an infinity of sources
So
that back
Turing,
up
I
everything
said to give you
said.
space, and then we're going to go to GSU. Kobe, I think you had your hand up.
Oh,
And then
no, I don't have anything
Oh,
to say. I
and then
just- I
Clav, you also okay. All right, so we'll go to Clav and then GSU.
Oh, sorry. So yeah, I get what you're saying, Riverboat Jack. I'm not gonna like dispute the like whether or not those facts are true or not. Okay, if I assume that the facts that you're stating are true, I don't think it really matters. Like a lot of the things that you're bringing up are things that rich people are, or it's still going to create the same problems that you're describing. So, okay, rich white people don't want their kids to go to school with black people. So now a bunch of rich white people live together in the same area so that their kids don't have to go to school with black people. Like that doesn't make a difference. And I think that that's just like a red herring to bring something like that up. To dismiss the idea that they do still, or people still, rich people still, pay into these systems, and just because they have access to something private doesn't mean that they don't pay. And they will still always, even with the voucher system, I hear you on the voucher system, they're still going to try and come up with whatever scheme that they can to avoid paying taxes in either case.
Yeah,
It's not going to make a difference.
I agree with you on most of that, except that I think it does make a very fundamental difference. Because if you are actively lobbying for tax vouchers that funnel money, not just into like the school your kids go to, but a school that's run for profit, I have a major problem with that as a taxpayer whose money also goes to that school. I don't think my money should go to a private institution that you are able to then opt your kid out of public education. I'm sorry.
But then the problem
okay,
is
but
actually
it
the vouchers, not the access to private institutions. It's that they have access, or that this mechanism exists.
But
in the
that
first
this
place.
comes to the whole conversation.
this
of
is such BS.
they're lobbying for those vouchers.
And I'm sorry, Doobie. I maybe it doesn't.
Right,
Maybe
but
it's not
so
true.
are.
That's true.
Wait, hold on. Wait, really? No. What's BS is that this is like white people pushing for school vouchers. Black people also support school vouchers. I think the majority of like Democrats, including black people, black parents, support school choice and school vouchers. Right? So
That's-
presenting this
okay,
as like some
but
white plot to
this-
get away from
this
black
is
people. When black people
literally-
also
okay.
support this thing because the public school system is shit and they don't want to send their kids
Right.
to shitty schools. Right?
And
This
it's
is just fucking
shit
ridiculous.
because of
So stop
private
presenting
schools
this-
sucking
stop
up all the
presenting
money.
this as if white people are supporting
Doobie,
this, right?
Doobie,
And
are
this is
why
rich
white-
people
this
going
is
to
white
send their kids to
conspiracy
shitty
Okay.
schools,
to
or
get
are
away
they
from
going to
black
make
people.
sure that
Okay.
their
Black
public
people
school is
also
properly
support this
funded?
fucking
Okay,
thing,
okay.
right? So it's just
Doobie,
stupid.
why are the public schools shitty now? Because they were funded by local property taxes. So if you don't live in a rich neighborhood, you don't get good funding to your school, which means you don't get good education,
Obviously.
which it perpetuates the system. Okay, so then a lot of people are going to want to opt out. But let's fix the public education system rather than allowing people to opt out and go to private.
Right, but what I'm saying is this isn't a race issue. This isn't a
I'm
white
not
people trying to get away
saying
from black
it's a
people.
race issue.
That
I'm
is
saying that
the
it's
only one.
historically
The
rooted
solution is
in
to
race.
Riverboat Jack
Okay.
brought up race
No,
like 4
okay,
times.
The
What the
problem
fuck
is that they can opt out.
Yeah, okay. All right. So,
It is historically rooted in race.
okay.
You
all right.
cannot get around that issue.
Let's get GSU counter shadows.
Yeah, so and yeah, I'm not muted. Okay. Yeah, so a lot of things that Riverboat Jack is saying is absolutely true. And I want to explain why we come to a different conclusion now. So at my high school, before 1996, it was about 60% black. I mean, 60% white and like 40% black. And what was discovered in 1996 or late 1995 was that the administrators at the school that I went to, which was a public school, were funneling black kids into vocational tech classes. This is back when there was like vocational and college prep. They were funneling them into vocational, and they weren't allowing black kids to go to college prep classes. When this was found out, that they were like disenfranchising black people, what happened was all of the white teachers, a good chunk of the white teachers left, and also all of the white students. My school went in 1 year from being 60% white to 99.9% black. It was over national news, a whole bunch of stuff. So as a black person, when people decide to move themselves away from black people, I'm not like a black nationalist or something. That shit's cringe as hell. But when racist people decide to move away, it allows for good outcomes for black people. So I don't care if somebody is racist and they're like, I don't want my child to go to school with black people, because guess what? I don't want your racist ass child going to school with my black kid either. And the idea that we have a system where our government literally supports oppression, and the take that y'all derive from that on the left is weird to me. It's that should be the only system. So when Donald Trump was president, if he would have said, well, let's end trans healthcare, I'm pretty sure a lot of people would have felt like, hey, well, I need another option to be able to seek to better help myself. And that's why the private system is always important, and we should protect it. This idea that the government is so virtuous and always going to have our like well-being at heart is silly. So me as a black person in this country, when you look at healthcare outcomes for black people and they don't get treated the same way, and all the other statistical data that's just widely available, the idea that my take from that would be, well, we should just have one system and hope that it fixes it for black people, is silly. No, we should have the ability to have private industry that can cater to our needs better. And if such a private entity exists, then I would want to give that private entity money rather than holding myself crippled to the global morality of white people in this country saying, yeah, we're going to make things better for black people. It's absolutely silly as any form of minority to advocate for the government to be like the only solution, because like historically we can see that's done for minorities. So I don't understand why people advocate for this. It's absolutely silly.
So can I just
I'll throw it
respond
back to
real
Jack.
quick?
It's only a question for Gambit, and it'll lead into your question. Gambit, are you willing to admit that the people opting into the private, though, is taking like staffing and funding and all kinds of things away from the public? By opting into that private system, you're coring out and you're leaving kind of like the public shell.
Well, so my answer is kind of no. So if 15% of my taxes was going to be allocated for education, and I pay my portion of my taxes, and that goes to the education system, I fulfill my civic duty in investing in education. Now, you could always say there's a fairy tale world where the tax rate is higher, right? But that's avoiding the scenario that you just asked me. So I think if people are paying their fair share of taxes, then my answer is no. Could there potentially be more investment if you did the 5-head abolish everything take? Yeah, absolutely. But that doesn't mean that's something I would advocate for. That doesn't mean that's something I think would be efficient for minorities. And that doesn't make me think that that's something we should march towards. I hope that answers your question.
So a couple things. First off, I think it is actually good for white kids and black kids to go to school together. I think that it is something that makes society overall less racist. I know. I'm just saying, my hope would be, even if you come from a family with 2 racist parents, if you go to a school that has numerous people of different skin colors, is that your kid turns out much less racist. And we know that is a general trend in society.
Do you know the danger that those racist people do to things like black girls in our society?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
like,
but that
there's a lot of
I'm not going to
damage
use
that
that
you're
danger
ignoring.
as an excuse to like advocate
No,
for
this isn't
segregated
danger.
schools.
This isn't just danger. These are real affected outcomes. problems. Like my daughter is 5 years old, and she came home one day from daycare talking about how she felt about her hair. So I had to go buy a whole bunch of books and tell her, no, you're beautiful, blah, blah, blah. Like the effects of this stuff that y'all say are just, they're so horrendously bad. And I wish y'all had the lived experience of some of the things that you're advocating for.
I, as a trans person who lived through the public education system, I get at least a little bit of it, a little bit. But no, what I'm saying is, I think that, yeah, that is a worthwhile trade-off for having less racist people in the world. I think that the fight for having, desegregated schools was a worthwhile one, and that we should get as many different kinds of people together as possible to make society less racist. And on top of that, when we're talking about a universalized system that is better, Martin Luther King Jr. literally helped integrate private and public hospitals in the United States by tying the Civil Rights Act and tying anti-discrimination policies to federal funding. So any hospital in the United States that got federal funding had to integrate. Because before that, private hospitals essentially said, we're not going to treat black people. We're only going to take white patients. And when we look at that history, I think that it is good to have universalized programs. And when you bring up like Donald Trump saying, well, trans people won't have health care. Well, no, that still had privatized healthcare. I would still be able to get maybe healthcare under a system that Donald Trump was proposing. The issue was that there would be super expensive plans or no plans at all in a private system. And that would be what would harm trans people. Trans people just wouldn't have coverage for their trans issues. So when we're talking about this kind of stuff, we need to put it in perspective. We need to portray the information accurately. And I think that overall, integrating these systems, having black folks and white folks of all classes using the same systems is something that universally benefits society and makes us better people as a result. And letting people isolate themselves in rich little enclaves or slightly better educational environments, I think that causes the overall system of education to suffer and suffer greatly.
Okay, let's go to Encounter Shadows, Kobe, Clav.
Yeah, so I just kind of wanted to sanity check my understanding of the voucher system in general, because while I understand that it can have nefarious ends, I also understand GSU and Doobie's arguments for school choice, school freedom, all that kind of stuff. And so this is my understanding of it. Basically, what ends up happening is that the state pools a decent chunk of the property tax money into a general pool and assigns a dollar value to each student. I think in the state of Florida, it's like 8,250 or something like that. So what ends up happening from those pooled, from that pooled property tax revenue is that every single municipality will basically get a redistribution back for that dollar amount. But that is not the only revenue for the state. What also happens is there's millage. It goes through like the municipal level through the millage rate. So what ends up happening is that there's like a state level, state sanctioned dollar amount that is the mandatory minimum for each student going to each school. But then what happens is, so for instance, the millage rate in a different county, I want to say is like 0.00065 or something like that. Mine is like 0.00017. I literally have triple the property taxes. But as a result of triple the property taxes, my schools are a fuckload better than the one with the triple of the property tax rate. And that's because that money gets invested in the municipal level back into the school. The reason why I bring this up at all is because the system that George W. Bush was advocating for with the school vouchers was basically saying that a student can transfer to any school that they want to with that tax revenue. But then what ends up happening as a result is the shitty schools become shittier and the better schools become a lot better. And the kids who can't afford to travel are the kids who don't have parents who are willing to wake up at fucking 6 a.m. to drive them fucking 60 minutes across town in order to get into the good school. They're just fucked. And that's kind of where I kind of want to concede this argument that 1, property taxes are important. 2, funding is important. Administrative bloat may 3, administrative bloat may have eaten a decent chunk of the money that we have upped in our school system, but that doesn't change the fact that our public school system sucks ass. I am reticent to send my own kid into the public school system, despite having a high quality public school system, because I went to that public school system. I got into fistfights. I got drunk. I smoked pot. I had teachers who didn't give a fuck. And it's a fucking animal house. That's what it is. So all of this to say, to pretend that we have done what we can for young Americans, to pretend that we have maxed out what we can do for young American education is bullshit. Whether it's financial or cultural, we gotta fucking change the system down up. If rich people want to go to their last point, if rich people want to go to their fucking schools or whatever, I don't give a fuck, as long as they fund good quality public schools first.
Okay.
Yeah, I just want to call out that I'm not for the school choice thing. You kind of included me with Doobie. I'm definitely not for that in any way.
Nah, you're a libertarian now. Deal with it.
Okay, all right. So let's go to Shadows, Kobe, Clav.
Yeah, so I actually
Indeed.
initially wanted to speak because I actually kind of wanted to back up what Doobie is saying. It is true that there is a history of racism when it comes to sending your kids to private schools in the South. But it's also true that there are a lot of Black voters who actually do support school choice. Whenever a charter school opens up, like in Chicago, there will be a block there'll be a line that lasts 4 or 5 blocks because families want to send their kids there. They know it's better. And that's the thing. When it comes to voucher systems, like we talked about it, is I think there should be a voucher system, but it should be a sort of a lottery system for people in underprivileged communities. They get the opportunity to send their kids to these schools, and the city helps pay for that. And also, you also mentioned.
I'm sorry.
Let him finish.
Yeah.
There are voucher systems that do sort of function like a lottery, but the last thing is I'm just saying it is true that Black voters do want school choice, and I do believe that saying your zip code determines where you go to school is not good at helping their kids in these areas get opportunity. But my last point is, Riverboat Jack, you also mentioned rich white people sort of secluding themselves and cutting them off in certain areas. Unfortunately, this has sort of already happened by redlining. And it's really bad. I agree. Diversity is so important. I went to a super diverse school district. I also had a lot of district hoppers in my area because of, and I want those kids to be able to get that opportunity. But I think when it comes to these redline communities that just have a bunch of rich white people, I think maybe if that school district is too white, maybe they should have to save some seats. Maybe they should have to save some seats for kids from underprivileged communities to go up there. Which is why reparations for redlining is far more based than reparations for slavery, in my opinion. So just putting that out there.
Okay, all right. So the list is Kobe, Clav, Doobie, and Jack. I just got to say something though. I don't know what this Black people like it too means anything about the past, right? Or the racialized origins there within, right? Hold on. Right? There are Black Republicans, so any criticism of the Republican Party being racist is completely invalidated because there are Black people for the Republican Party. That doesn't mean anything, right? That actually means nothing. Touring News hit the nail on the head perfectly, talking about how the system itself has been destroyed, right, for public school systems. The outcomes are not good. So in certain areas, in certain areas it's the case. In other places, right, with those high property taxes, yes, indeed, those public schools are actually quite nice. But it's not illogical, the parents there, right, to want to find any way out. So the fact that we have, as Shadow said, lines wrapped around a block when a new when there's a chance to get your
Charter
kid into
school.
a charter school or a public school, right? That has better outcomes. That makes that's of course. What are they going to do, right? It's not like they're these people. Oh, and they might. They might. But it's not like in that moment what they're currently concerned about is like the larger ramifications of the public and private funding and how those things interact, right? And are they actually further degrading the private public schools by taking their child there? None of that factors into that. The point is their kid. The kid right now, the kid who has a long set of years in education and wanting to get the best outcomes for them. And if that's not at their public school, sure. But that doesn't absolve the system, as Jack has laid out, for being racialized in its origin, right, and still racist in its outcomes currently. So
Can I respond to that really
Quickly,
quickly?
no, that was targeted towards me. I need to
we got.
I would-
Shut up. We got limited time, and a lot of people want to talk. So, Kobe, Clav, Doobie, Jack, and Chow's at the end.
I just want to say, first things first, you're all racist. No, I'm joking. I was not ready for a conversation about school funding, so I'm just going to kind of go back to like my initial point. I think that private property is, and like what we're talking about earlier, the idea of like allowing the rich to have their own systems is bad in some cases and not bad in the others. Some people have better gaming PCs than other people. I don't necessarily think that's that big of a deal, even though I'm very angry I can't get a new graphic card, but you know. That aside, but I don't think that I don't think it's very good. Like for example, like I don't like the idea of like firefighters. I could think of a lot of really shitty. You know, what happens if like the private firefighters get there first, but then like they need some sort of equipment that the professional firefighters come. You know, how does that work? I don't know. That can be regulated, I guess, but that just seems sticky. When it comes to something like security, I'm a little bit more sympathetic because I think, as I don't know who was it, Connor Points, was it Touring brought up the idea of like what's it called like gardeners being given rifles or whatever. Yeah, I don't know. Onto the school thing. I just to throw my hat in the lot. I think public schools pretty cool. I think that like obviously there are advantages to different types of school fundings, but I would need to research it more to be able to really give a good opinion on it.
Let's go to Clav, Doobie, Jack, and Shadows. Clav.
Yeah, so I think like the conversation is like really far in the weeds with the education examples. Like you guys are talking about a lot of this is being talked about as funding issues, but I don't think anybody's advocating that people shouldn't have to fund public schools. If you're citing vouchers as an issue, vouchers are the issue, not necessarily the privatization. If you're talking about mixing people together that have different walks of life, that's a matter of where people live largely. This is a matter of redlining. There's other issues that are there that are beyond just the scope of just the privatization and people having access or having the option not to opt out of paying for public systems, but having the option to use a private option instead of a public system, because you can do both. You still can fund a public option and have a private option.
Clav, those two things are tied, correct? Right? Where people live, you brought up the redlining and the schooling. So
yes, and that's what I'm saying. I'm saying that like that's not just about privatization. So if I remove your ability, if I remove the privatization, then we still don't achieve what Riverboat Jack is describing of integrating these different populaces. Because property taxes, we know, are where funding for a lot of funding for schooling comes from, as everybody keeps establishing. So there's still going to be a large amount of segregation just based on where people live.
But it doesn't have to be, right? Like you could literally change the funding structure. Like we could just do that. Right? Like other countries don't do that.
Yeah, and I'm not saying that you can't change the funding structure. Changing the funding structure can happen regardless of whether or not people can privatize their education.
Exactly.
You could still do that.
Oh, okay.
So I'm saying that they're not like privatization doesn't stop any of that from happening.
We'll get into. I should get into this a little later on, but I want to make sure other people can get their points out. So, Doobie, Jack, Shadows.
So quickly to respond to you, Prime. So the reason that I push back against the origin of this is racism and white people want to get away from black people thing is because I think it's a red herring. I don't think it matters in the current day. I agree that was the origin, but I mean, if you look at the push for abortion rights and Planned Parenthood, a lot of that was due to racism too. They wanted to get rid of the undesirables, so they wanted to give black people access to abortion. That's why like 80% of the clinics at the time were being put into black neighborhoods. So the origin of that push was also racist. It doesn't mean that today there aren't people within the system pushing for abortion rights who are doing it for non-racist reasons. I don't think that just saying, "Oh, this was racist in the past," means it's racist today. I just don't think it's helpful. Now, getting to the school vouchers thing, the reason I push Jack on this is I don't think it's a good example of the rich disinvesting from public systems, right? Because again, we can see across the board, if you actually look this up, that public funding at the federal, state, and local levels has actually increased for education over the last 30 years. That is with the rise of charter schools and private schools and all these other things, and school vouchers and school choice and all this. Even that, please don't interrupt me. Even with that being the case, please stop interrupting me. Please stop interrupting me. Control yourself.
Everyone shut. We have a limited amount of time left, so he's got to get his point out. And respond.
Answer the question real quick. Is it adjusted for inflation? Yes or no?
Yes.
Okay,
Google
you're wrong
it. Yes.
Again.
Okay. Google it. So that being said, right? So this is why I don't think it's a good example, right? Because they actually haven't investment has increased. It's just, I think, going to the wrong areas. But I think all of us here would agree that the public school system is shit, right? And if we need to fix that by having funding for this thing not linked to property taxes, I think most of us would support that, right? Finding some way to link it to something else and then making sure that funding is going where it needs to go and not into administrative bloat. That being said, even if if we had like adequate funding for education across the board, schools are being funded equally, the money is going where it needs to go to the classrooms and the children, would there be a reason not to allow people to pay into some other private system and send their kids somewhere else? Like, so even if we fix the school funding thing, is there a reason we shouldn't allow people to go to private school anyway?
And the reason so far has been because there's a benefit to mixing people together that have different backgrounds. Like that's what's been cited so far, I think.
No, there's
not a lot of compulsion.
Additionally, I added early on in my arguments that private entities are not beholden to civil rights the same way that public entities are. And so that a private school can have a different set of applied values than a public school. And largely this can have really bad effects on both on the kids that go there and for society as a whole. And when we're talking about using public money to fund private schools that run for profit, we're talking about defunding public schools, which inherently hurts everyone else in the system. And this is something, by the way, that isn't like outside of the realm of possibility, because guess what? In 2017, Donald Trump wanted to slash the Department of Education by around $9 billion, but put $1.25 billion into school choice programs and an additional like 250 or 300 million into private voucher programs for private schools. So when we're talking about this, it's not like this abstract thing. It's billions of dollars. And the private school industry is now large enough to effectively lobby the government for additional tax credits or additional funding. And that's only going to be something that gets worse. And I think that it undeniably and historically hurts public schooling.
I'll answer your question, Doobie. And Jesse, I see your hand. I'll put you on the list. Is that another reason? Is the reason why we had this question in the first place, right? The very start of this is that once they have that option, that private option, rich people will then take the time to disinvest, right? So you can say that, okay, what if we achieve equity, right, in funding? You can achieve equity in funding, and then why is there a reason that to stop these people otherwise? Well, thing is, how long will that equity last, right? Equality isn't something that's static, right? Nothing in our society is static, and so those same forces that have caused those people to invest, those rich individuals, to disinvest and undermine the school system as it is now will still exist in that period of equity, right? Where we pass some bill or something, right? And then we fix it. Well, then they'll unfix it because they have the time, they have the energy, they have the money, they have the resources to do exactly that. So that's the problem. Well, that's one of the problems anyway. But DB, I'll let you respond to that, and then I got to move on.
Yeah. So that just seems like a I don't want to be mean. It just seems like fear-mongering, right? So I think if these things weren't linked to the property tax and we found some other way to fund them, I don't think that in a democratic society it'd be very easy for rich people to just lobby the government to take the funding away, because of that we've seen that hasn't happened.
The welfare
right? So
state.
even as these they've been sending their children to private schools, charter schools, they're increasing magnet schools, all these things. Even as this has been happening for the last 30 years, right? You've had increases in funding across the board for education. So I'm just not convinced that's like a realistic fear. But that being said, I'm actually curious, Prime. Are you like totally opposed to like because a lot of private schools are like religious, like Catholic schools, Muslim schools, Jewish schools. Like, do you think parents shouldn't be able to make the decision to send their children there?
To religious schools?
Yeah, to like a religious.
Come on.
Like a hold on.
No,
it's
it's a question. What do you think the answer is
going to be?
Hold on. Yeah, because a lot of these private schools are religious, right? They're Muslim, Jewish, Catholic. Like, so should parents not be able to say, "Hey, I want my children to get an education, but I want them to learn about their religion too"?
If I get to get rid of religious schools as well, if it's a twofer, then yes.
Now he's lost. We can't get him anymore.
I feel like I'm stealing this right out of GSU's fucking mouth, though. But part of the reason, part of the reason why people want private schools is because if they're religious, they want to raise them with religious values. So, like, literally, this just feels like a veiled attack on people being raised in religious schools.
Like, I'm not a veiled attack. I'm actively attacking them as a secularist.
So why wouldn't you expect some pushback on that?
Oh, that's fine. It's cool. But my job is to defeat you. So Jack, Shadows, GSU.
So, first off, Kobe, I want to live in PS5 communism, a PS5 in every household, a gaming PC in every vacation home. And on top of that, to Doobie, like, no, we have historical examples of just what you're saying doesn't happening. So, for example, when we look back at the fallout from Brown versus the Board of Education, you can look at Prince Edward County, where guess what? They were so committed to segregated schooling that they got a county board of supervisors to slash the funds of public schools by $150,000, and then eventually that just kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger until they were slashing public schools by $700,000. And so effectively they closed the public schools, making the private schools the only option, pricing people that they didn't like, in this case Black people, out of schooling. So when we're talking about it, you can't say, well, that just doesn't happen, because it does. It does happen. It's just happening in a different way now, under a different guise, for different political reasons. And like, saying it doesn't happen is just not consistent with what has happened historically. And when we're talking about individual, like black people want private schools. Well, yeah, because people are rational actors. And in the broken system we have right now, sometimes private schools are the best option to get an education for your kid. But I would counter that by just saying that, hey, let's just fix public schools and make sure that public schools are the best option for your kid. And one of the ways we can do that is by forcing people to go to public school, because then guess what? Rich people want their kids to go to good schools. They're going to make sure that public system is fully funded. They're going to make sure that that public system works really well for everyone involved, because their kids go there too. And when we're talking about, like, I lost my train of thought. Go on.
May I make an off-topic meme, Prime?
Go ahead. Off-topic meme.
Okay, Cool. Right. We were talking about like full communism PS5 games and everything. Like it kind of is technically there already. All that we need is like a better version of Starlink to get internet to everybody, and then you could log into Google Stadia, or you could log into like a server where you can access where the game is actually being hosted, and then people could just technically play it over their internet connection. So all of the technology is actually there that we don't all need our own graphics cards. We could just use an internet over the top game delivery service. If we had like a good nationalized broadband and internet infrastructure system, then we wouldn't have to each individually have our own GPUs and our own processors. It would be less energy intensive. It would be less materials intensive and so forth. So like these answers, like a lot of these fucking questions, like there are some simple answers to them.
I remembered my train of thought real quick.
I just wanted to say that Stadia is always going to be crap, and you had me. I was with you until you brought that point up, Troy. Then you lost me completely.
Oh, sorry. But it's out there somewhere.
Jack, finish your point. Then we got to move on.
Yeah. All I was gonna say is, fuck public school, fuck private schools and religious schools. You should go. Your kids should learn the same curriculum as every other kid, and if you really, really care about your religious values, you should be able to make time after school for your religious practices and education.
All right, Shadows, GSU, Clab.
I'm the elitist.
So the point that I initially wanted to respond to what you were saying initially in response to what I said, which I think Doobie already said a good amount, but I just want to reiterate, like, I think the reason why, and I do sort of agree with what Doobie is saying. I don't think it's like a red herring, but I don't think it's that relevant, because the truth is the majority of voters in like the city of Chicago will support it. So the weird thing is you mentioned like Republican voters and like, oh, so there are black Republicans, so these criticisms don't make sense. What would be a more accurate analogy would actually be saying like, talking about like, oh, well, did you know that the Democrats used to be racist? It was the Democrats that was the party, the KKK. It's like, well, but the majority of black voters are now Democrats. I don't think that's really relevant. Obviously, it's not to the same proportion, because I think it's like around 90% of black voters in the U.S. are Democrats at the national level. But even if it was like 60%, I think we would still probably agree that that point is still valid. So I that's just my thing. But generally I don't want to like just diverge back to that. Since we are talking about like fixing the education system and how to fund it, I agree with that. I would totally be fine with changing how it's funded. It be less local. The only thing is, I know in my area there are some very exorbitant property taxes. And the reason why my parents are okay with that is because of how fucking great our school district is. So assuming those property taxes become less exorbitant, that would be fine. But, that does happen in some areas, that some people are going to be like, well, if these property taxes aren't going to fund these amazing schools, that's fine, but they would just want them slashed by a lot. I would just like to make that clear. But I am generally in favor of like, yeah, let's delocalize some of the funding for schooling so it's better for inner city children. Because the thing is, my school district has always been affected by this. I'm not trying to talk to myself, but I live literally right next to the west side. There's one street dividing me and like some very violent neighborhoods. So a lot of kids come here, and it's like, I want those kids to not have to, hop districts to, have a future, to get a good education.
All right.
Does anybody know why school funding is tied to property taxes? Because it just seems like a bad idea on its face. Like, why is there like a good?
Sure.
Does anybody have an argument for that?
Yeah, it was to redline people. It was literally to do what we're kind of like talking about, is to keep the poor districts poor.
Then yeah, I think we'd all be in favor of changing the way they're funded. Like, I don't think anybody would disagree with that.
GSU, and then Clap.
Yeah, so I think what we can see has been displayed here is exactly the fear that a lot of people have when we talk about getting rid of privatization. There's a lot of people who feel like they are the most virtuous and their ideas are the best, and they want to inject those ideas on everyone else, and they don't want you to have an option but to subscribe to whatever they think the best form of ideology is. This is why it's incredibly important that we always have like private institutions there Like there are so many airhead ideas around education. Like last week, somebody on the Tiffany Star was like, "Yeah, we should teach kids how to masturbate in 2nd grade." Like the idea that I could live in a country with people that have such dumb ideas and that would be the only option for education is silly. It's like uber oppressive. Like it's something I would expect like a right wing dictator to advocate for. So the fact that the left, or at least super leftists, are getting to the point where they literally advocate for nonsense like this is scary to live in a country where like this is the actual reality. You have far right fascists and you have leftists that are becoming like as authoritarian as they are
But
because
GSU,
everybody thinks they have the best ideas. It's silly.
but GSU,
It's
did
disgusting.
you ever consider that the left is just right about every single thing all of the time? Did you ever consider that?
Bro,
Unfortunately not.
Okay,
Well,
I was being
one of the-
extremely fucking
You
sarcastic.
should,
no, I
but
know.
you
I
should.
said no.
You,
I-
you
It's about
honestly should, though.
masturbation is that you can tell them not to masturbate in the classroom. Because guess what? That happens a lot more than teach than
Wait,
you
have
know.
they tried making the schools into co-ops? Have they tried that yet?
Haven't
Yeah,
tried. That's a good question, actually.
You know what? Take my entire
shit.
argument. If we have democratic worker co-op schools, I'm okay with private. There we go.
Okay.
There we go.
All right.
All right.
Nice. Compromise
We brought
reached.
the meme back, everybody.
GSU. GSU.
Oh, well, that's cool.
Finish telling us how terrible leftists are.
No, I was mostly finished. I just think it's like the fact that we have a constitution and people are here espousing that. Like you even I'm like, no, yeah, your religious freedom. Yeah, I should be able to
It's
encroach
not
on
the
that. It's silly.
not the religious
Like,
freedom I'm attacking. That's not what I'm attacking.
yes.
That's
Right
not
now
what I'm
we have the
attacking.
religious-
No. Religious
Yes, it
freedom
is.
doesn't mean that.
Yes, it is.
No. Religious freedom doesn't mean that you
Your
can.
religion should
Can I-
mean
can I-
that you can go to
Can I
Yeah,
not have
an
a
after-school
that's not
school
program.
right now?
That's not what
Can I not
religious.
have a?
That's not
can
what
I not
religious
have
freedom
a-
is. It means you can practice your
you're
religion,
not-
right? So you can actively practice
So
your religion.
Can I ask my question so you can answer the question that I'm asking?
Okay, sure. Go ahead.
Okay, right now, do I have the freedom to have a private education and inside of that same school also embed religious principles? Is that freedom granted to us today? Do I have the freedom to have a private education system that also embeds religious ideology into the kids that go to that school? Yes or no?
Unfortunately, yes.
Okay, are you willing to encroach on that freedom that I currently have? So don't say I'm screaming at you. I don't get why you own up to what you said.
Because what you're doing here is trying to confuse the two, and I won't let you do that, right? You guys do have that freedom. That doesn't mean that freedom is a religious freedom, right? So that's all that is that you have the ability to design your own system, right? And you don't have to base that system on religion. You can base it on any set of principles, right? But that doesn't. So it's not the fact that it's religious is the problem. It's the fact that it's a separate private system used to escape the public system. And then after that, it'd be one thing if they were just left, right? If they just left, okay, sure, right? But the fact that the public system is then degraded by those very same people who are running away from it, that's the problem. That's the problem. So you're saying
for a
religious freedom,
public
you're
school.
throwing
Yeah,
in
it's an
there.
economic
You would be for
And I'm for
public
religious
religious
freedom.
school then.
So I'm just saying I'm
So
for
you're for a
religious
public
freedom.
religious school.
For
Just
public-
go to after school programs at your church.
Yeah, after school
Like care
programs.
enough about your religion to actually
Well,
like go to
the
church.
should
ideology
have-
that
you
you
should
want to
have
embed.
a
No,
Christian
the ideology
club.
and
You
the
should have a
cultural
Christian
issues that
club.
you want to embed in school.
You
just
should
learn that
have
after
you should
school.
have a Christian club.
Wait, do you wait,
in-
GSU Gambit, do you want the Westboro Baptist Church to have a school?
I don't
So-
care if they have a school because I don't
why-
believe in encroaching
Okay,
so-
on people.
See, I have a problem with people going to school and learning that you should show up at funerals and scream at people, or people going to school
yeah,
and learning that gay people are nasty and gross.
So
I just don't
Hey,
exactly
GSU,
get why
can I help
religion
you out?
has to be
But like
wait,
plenty of
wait,
people have a
teach them
problem
that-
with like
Hey, no, why can't you teach them that people aren't nasty and gross after school, like you said religion should?
Why
Like, you
does
see how
why does
silly that
religion
is?
why does
You see how
religion have
silly
to
that
be
is?
why
Because
does
I
religion have to be
I
taught
believe in
within
a
school?
baseline education system that teaches people the base things that they need to know to function in a society, and you don't need to know religious teaching to function in a society.
Well, maybe
So
that's your
you put it
ideology.
in an
Maybe there are
after-school
people that feel
program.
differently.
But
Okay.
Gambit, the question is like, why does religion have to be a specific education? Like, why does it have to be directly tied to education? Why can't the church be separate from the education system? Why do we have to
Because
marry
maybe
the
they
two?
want to use that time allotted where they already have people together and use that time advantageously to do that as well.
that's what Sunday school is for. Okay, let's go to class.
GSU.
Oh no, class.
Okay.
Yeah, well,
I'm in the
the
Bible
thing I
college.
wanted to talk about was like probably half an hour ago. Now you guys are talking about religion and shit.
Just
So
wait. FYI,
Hey,
if
go
I
ahead.
make a facial expression, it's because I'm playing Final Fantasy. It's not at y'all takes. Because I noticed I've been
Okay.
doing it. I'm
Wait,
playing.
wait,
I just died again.
GSU
Yeah.
Gambit, that's a very queer-friendly game. Be careful. Be careful.
I don't care about.
the hell
He's
is
okay.
wrong with
He's
that?
okay.
Okay, that was
with
What
trans
a thing to
people.
say.
Yeah, he's okay with
Oh, I'm sorry. I got accused of being. My profession
was
got impugned on this panel.
That
and
was by
claimed
Doobie. That was by
racist.
Doobie.
That was Doobie. That was Doobie.
Sure.
That was
I was
Doobie.
Doobie.
Yeah.
I was advocating that
Quick
women should
reminder,
have the
porn is rape,
capacity to choose
Oh
who they
my
have
God.
sex with, whether
Oh,
it's for
okay.
money or not. I was on your side.
Okay,
This-
I did
This
not
is
remember it that way.
really quick. Okay,
My bad. I apologize.
earlier you guys
problem.
were talking about so we're arguing about funding and everything like that, and the frustrating thing to me about that back and forth is when you guys talk about how you want to fix these problems and you talk about getting rid of privatization, then we move into then there's like a property tax issue, right? Because then all the rich people are just going to be like congregated together, and they're still going to be segregated, and they're still going to have the better schools. And you guys go, no, we'll fix the funding with that. For our idea, we'll fix the funding. And then when we talk about having a private option, it's like, okay, here's these problems with the private options, and we go, oh, okay, well, yeah, we should fix the funding on that. Then you guys go, no, fuck you, you can't do that. This is that's so frustrating. Like, we can also advocate that, even with a
Why not just
private
fix
option,
the universal system that everyone else has to go to?
because you could have an option for people who want to opt into something else. You can have choice.
For-profit option.
A choice is usually a good thing.
I mean, the private option is typically funded by private individuals.
So
Like that.
Okay, yeah, that's in either case.